Yo, what's good, Shinobi Nation? Welcome back to Just a Shinobi, the home of the craziest Naruto what-ifs. Today we're jumping into part 3 of What If Naruto Has Chance for a Prophecy? So strap in, because things are about to get explosive. If you're new to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share this video with your whole ninja squad. And of course, drop your theories in the comments. Your support is what keeps this shinobi grinding. Chapter 12. Door Handle. One must have a good memory to be able to keep the promises one makes. Friedrich Nietzsche. Toriko had been wandering for hours in the empty passages of the corridor, and his feet started to ache. Strange. That's never happened before. I know the way. I'm sure. I always go this way. He passed by a burnout gaslight, but before he left it he stopped. His hands moved without second thought. He carefully tapped the burner once. Nothing happened. He narrowed his eyes and repeated the movement, and on his third try he was blinded by the yellow light from the lamp. It forced him to step backward, rubbing his eyes as the sudden light painfully stabbed into his irises. When he gained back his vision and the pain finally faded away, he looked back at the gaslight with a satisfied smile, before he turned to continue his way through the water. He finally arrived at his destination and worriedly glanced toward the rusty metal door with the cracks and bulges. Toriko ran his eyes over the unidentifiable forged pattern, then he looked down to the water, waiting for the thing on the other side of the door to begin its attempt to force itself out, and the concrete floor to disappear from under his feet. But nothing happened for several long minutes. Everything was silent, no snarling, no ruffling, and no sound of impact as that thing charged against the door. The blond boy narrowed his eyes, watching the black water around his ankles. A thought reared its head inside his mind. Something was different. Toriko narrowed his eyes even more and finally moved his orbs toward the rusty door again. He examined it carefully, centimeter by centimeter, but he couldn't find what was bothering him. Everything just looked the same as last time and as always. He let out a defeated sigh and moved his eyes back to the concrete floor under the water. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the rough edges under his naked feet. He blinked when realization hit him hard and flung his head toward the door, together with his body, almost falling down into the water by the sudden movement when he grabbed the handle. A handle. There is a door handle. He stayed in the awkward position, frozen, not daring to move his body and absolutely not move the handle. He finally shook his head to ease away his worry and slowly leaned toward the door and placed his ear onto the pleasantly hot surface and closed his eyes, concentrating with his every nerve to the sounds behind the door. Everything was silent except the noise of water dripping. Thoughts ran across his mind with insane speed. There is a handle. I can open it. I can finally see that thing. As he slowly opened his eyes, the warm sensation from the door increased, teasing him, tempting every part of his body, stroking every nerve inside his flesh to finally move his hands and push down that damn handle. Toriko narrowed his eyes, doubts and worry started to fill his mind. Suddenly he heard something from his back. Not from behind the door, from his back, only centimeters from his spine. A soft textile ruffled, maybe silk, and the sewer filled with the scent of vanilla. He wanted to move his body, to turn around, and his mind pushed away every other thought. Only the screaming voice stayed. Run! Move, you idiot! His muscles tensed, ready to jump when another thought popped up. No. His thoughts calmed down to an almost unnatural level. He could now imagine himself falling asleep in his dreams, while he closed his eyes. Just run, you damn moron! He felt the burdens disappear from his shoulders. His soul settled down, like a lake on a summer day without any breeze to ruffle its surface. No. The screaming voice died down to a whimper of fear. Why not? You are going to kill me! A soft smile spread across his face. Have faith in me. Everything will be all right. With this last thought, the sensation behind him died down and disappeared, so did the voice in his mind. He slowly moved his head and glanced over his shoulder, but only the empty tunnel winked back to him. He closed his eyes once more and let out a breath and pushed down on the door handle. It moved smoothly, without a hitch, until it finally reached its final destination and the bolt left the socket. The door is now open. He just has to pull it. He slowly opened his eyes and pulled it gently toward himself. The tired hinges squeaked plaintively, and several small waves appeared on the water's flat surface by the small movement as the door opened a small slit, then stuck on the rough surface of the concrete floor. Toriko narrowed his eyes and gave more strength to the next pull, and the door bumped over a knob on the floor, which tripped its unsteady frame, creating bigger and bigger waves around his ankles. He glanced toward the slit. It still wasn't enough. He gathered his strength, and this time tugged on the door with more power. The rusty hinges gave up, and released the wall. Toriko felt as the enormous weight of the rusty door started to fall on him, and in the last second he managed to roll out from under the falling door, which hit the water with a loud splash. The sound of the impact echoed all over the empty tunnels, amplified by the walls and bounced back as reverberations. Toriko stayed sitting, his legs outstretched, and he leaned onto his two arms secured behind his back, out of the way in the shallow water. The blond boy blinked and stared into the newly opened passageway with wide eyes. It was empty. Empty and perfectly identical to where he was now, the same dull yellow lighting all the way down, the same brick pattern on the walls, and the same pipes running along the ceiling. Toriko narrowed his eyes and straightened to his feet. The sound of the waving water gently echoed toward the new passage in front of him. He moved his legs, and he felt the patterns of the still warm iron door with his bare feet. He slowly and carefully stepped onto it, watching as the small waves of his movement reached the doorframe and beyond it. He made one more hesitant step, then stopped again to stare again at the emptiness in front of him. He let out the air he didn't realize he was holding back, and determination ran across his face. His hesitant steps were replaced with confident strides toward the new corridor. Jiraiya watched with wide eyes as Toriko suddenly froze. His eyes snapped up, only the whites of them were visible. Kakashi immediately forgot about Katsuchi and jumped to Toriko when he started to fall onto the hard ground. The Jounin gently placed his body down, panic running rampant through his mind, while he started to examine the teen. They crouched next to him to check him, and let out a relieved sigh. "It's okay. He just passed out from exhaustion. He's sleeping." "What did you give him?" The IWA Nin only blinked, still confused and stunned by the boy's previous statement, but didn't answer. They dangerously narrowed his eyes, still examining the blonde teen laying on the ground in front of him. "They probably gave him a lot of sedatives. It's most likely an overdose. But with his healing abilities, I don't think it will be a problem. He is just sleeping." Kakashi nodded, relieved, and his tense muscles started to relax. Jiraiya looked back to the motionless commander, then moved his sight to the laying forms of the other unconscious enemy shinobi all over the field. "Make sure the others won't wake up." He gathered several sealing tags from his pouch and gave them to Kakashi. "Here, chakra binding and paralysis seals. Place each of them on their bodies while I notify Minato." Kakashi nodded and moved toward the shinobi after one last concerned look toward Toriko. Jiraiya sighed and summoned a small orange toad, who immediately disappeared after he finished his report to the Hokage. He bit his fingertip once more, and this time a much bigger toad appeared who, to Kakashi's horror, simply swallowed the 4 ninja and disappeared with a loud puff. "What did you do with them?" Jiraiya turned toward the shocked teen. "That was a prison toad. They were sent to the interrogation and torture department. Come on. We should take Toriko back to the post. Rin should check on that sedative, maybe she could extract it from his system." Kakashi nodded, while Jiraiya gently grabbed Toriko's limp body and headed back to the post. Toriko reached another passageway, this time a different one. The ankle-deep water disappeared and he found himself in a giant hall, which reminded him of a library. The place was filled with giant shelves, stretched out high to the ceiling, slumping under the enormous quantity of books, files, and scrolls. He shakily reached toward the nearest shelf and grabbed one scroll randomly. The blonde gasped when he read the title written with clumsy, childish hands, and his heartbeat increased. Academy graduation. He squeezed his eyes shut, to ease away the increasing excitement. My memories. He slowly opened the scroll, and an image immediately popped up in his head. His younger self in a bright orange jumpsuit, sitting on a swing sideways. The beams of the sun pierced through the tree leaves, drawing abstract patterns on his slumped form. He was alone, lonely, and disappointed. Toriko shook his head, rolled back the scroll as fast as he could, and put it back on the shelves like it was burning his skin. He looked down at his hands for a long minute, but curiosity surpassed his sadness. He hesitantly raised his hand and grabbed another scroll, this time from a different shelf, and without reading the title he rolled the scroll open. A new image flowed through his mind. He sat at a long counter, slurping his ramen, together with a pink-haired young girl and a raven black-haired boy. The same but younger girl, from his memory. Sakura. That was her name. He gently rolled up the scroll and placed it back where it was originally. He slowly ran his eyes over the titles, reading them randomly as he moved further and further along the shelves. Mission, Wave Country, Chunin Exam, Second Round. He spotted a more worn scroll than the others. The margins were tufted, the title almost unreadable because of the frequent use. Valley of the End. He hesitantly raised his hand, but he suddenly halted it in midair and shook his head. Toriku turned around slowly, examining the shelves and the enormous quantity of scrolls once more. He let out a breath and forced his legs to move, finally leaving behind his memories. The blonde passed by a much smaller and different pile of scrolls, tidily lined up behind the glass of a separate cabinet. He made a hesitant step toward it, before he nodded to himself, and opened the twin glass doors of the showcase and read some of its titles. Rasengan, Raisin Shuriken, Frog Kata. An enormous temptation filled his mind, someone or something calling him, stroking him. The blonde slowly shook his head, and without touching the scrolls he simply closed the glass doors and continued his way to the end of the hall, toward a giant vault. He reached it, and found himself on the shore of a large patch with soft green grass, tenderly swinging together with the graceful branches of enormous osier trees. The blond boy slowly closed his eyes, and he felt the same type of peace as in the passageway. He heard a soft rustle behind the giant forms of the willow trees, but he stayed still. He felt the warmth of a breath on his skin, and a soft smile spread across his face. He slowly opened his eyes and blinked at the sight. The enormous face of an orange canine-like creature was facing him, his red eyes glowing, and he could see the giant razor-sharp canine teeth in its mouth. Despite the scene, he didn't feel panic, or fear, or any amount of unease. Only sheer curiosity. The giant eyeballs suddenly filled with irritation and annoyance, and the canine narrowed his eyes. I'm pissed off beyond words. Tell me, how should I punish you? Excuse me? Toriku blinked in confusion, and the giant canine became more irritated. You are unbelievably stubborn. Toriku scratched his cheeks, and a small sheepish smile appeared on his face. That is true. Excuse me, but who are you? I should just tear you into tiny pieces, Naruto. What did you call me? The image of a slowly whirling fish cake popped up in his brain, and confusion ran across his face, sweeping the obvious threat to the side about his possibly painful death. You mean the thing in ramen? The orange canine slowly shook its head and let out a frustrated snort. Idiot. It raised its giant form above him, and the blonde blinked and stared at its countenance. He frowned and narrowed his eyes after he examined it from head to toe. His eyes twitched as he realized that the canine was actually a fox. A giant orange fox with a lot of 9 lazily flinging tails. You are a bijou. You are the QB. What are you doing in my head? The fox let out a sigh and rolled his eyes in annoyance again, then a scary grin appeared on its face. It slowly held out its first leg, the animalistic paw with giant and also razor-sharp claws clutched into a fist-like position. Toriku blinked in confusion, staring at the giant orange and furry fist in front of him, which was actually twice as big as him. He glanced up at the fox, who only rolled its ruby eyes again and let out an irritated groan, like an impatient and furious child, then in the end waited for him to respond while restraining his obvious frustration. Toriku narrowed his eyes and unconsciously clutched his right hand into fist. When he realized what he did, he raised his fist and examined it with a frown on his face, then glanced up to the fox again. The canine only nodded, but the irritated and now impatient expression never left its face. Toriku hesitantly stepped closer, staring at his fist for a long minute, before he finally bumped it into the canine's own fist. For a moment nothing happened, then he felt a shockwave run through the surroundings. The environment around them started to shake violently, and the ground quaked under his feet, then it stopped as suddenly as it started. He blinked and stepped back from the giant fox. Toriku raised his head toward the face of the orange canine, and a blank expression appeared on his face. After a long minute, staring blankly, he blinked and the emptiness immediately disappeared from his blue orbs, replaced with confusion. Kurama the fox let out a relieved sigh and smirked. Finally, Naruto made a confused face and narrowed his eyes. What happened? We are back in the how. How is this even possible? Unfortunately, killing you slowly and painfully will have to wait, because I fear you have got a show to perform. And some small advice: do not freak out, just go with the flow and play along. A jumbled expression appeared on his face before he felt a tug from the outside world. A groan left his mouth and a grimace appeared on his features when he started to feel the aching in his every muscle. A small and gentle hand moved a tuft of blonde hair from his face. He slowly opened his eyes and faced the soft smile of a brown-haired girl with 2 purple marks on each cheek. He blinked in confusion, then the memories about the girl flooded back to his mind. Rin. The girl chuckled and stroked away another tuft. I'm glad you are back. I was worried there for a second, you looked like you didn't recognize me. Well, he started to sit up, but an aching stab in his chest stopped his movements, and a painful hiss left his mouth. Slowly. I just patched your broken ribs. It will sting a little. After a long minute, he gathered himself and finally sat up in the hard bed. What happened? They gave you some kind of sedative. Much more than necessary. You would be in a coma if you and your body weren't as stubborn as you are. I was able to extract most of it. You were out for 3 hours before I could heal you. Hours? Confusion spread across his face and he blinked in surprise, while Rin chuckled and opened her mouth to answer, but the door suddenly burst open and a silver-haired young teen stepped into the room. I felt a chakra spike in Toraku. The blonde blinked, and he felt as his mouth fell open at the scene. He stared at the boy for a long moment, then a gentle smile spread across his face, which in the end turned into a wide grin. What's up, Kakashi-chan? Naruto burst out laughing and had to clamp his arm to his side because a stinging pain appeared due to the relentless laugh forcing his freshly healed ribs to move, not to mention his sore muscles. The Jounin frowned and folded his hands in front of his chest in irritation. I see. So you are much better now. Naruto forced his mind to calm down, but he still couldn't restrain all of the randomly bubbling chuckles. Sorry. Kakashi rolled his eyes, but moved closer to the blonde, examining him carefully with his one visible eye. Naruto then noticed a familiar scent and chakra signature, and for a moment his heart forgot a beat, as the grinning Jiraiya stepped inside the room. Naruto distantly felt his lips part, and his eyes started to sting, a lump forming in the back of his throat, but in the end he restrained the outburst of the overwhelming emotions racing through his mind. The sorrow, the relief, the doubt, and in the end, the devastating joy. Welcome back, Gaki. It started to become boring without you around. Naruto slowly closed his eyes and a soft smile appeared on his face. Hey, Jiraiya. They stepped closer with a curious expression. He didn't miss the roller coaster of emotions on his face and the wave in Toriku's chakra when he stepped inside. What is it? It's good to see you again, Dadabayo. The soft smile never left Naruto's face and Jiraiya couldn't help but mimic it. Dadabayo, huh? He spends too much time with Kushina. The blonde leaned forward on the bed, crossing his legs and focused his thoughts on the memories of the last 3 months. It felt strange, like they didn't belong to him. The memories of the last 3 months continuously appeared inside his head, and his confusion only increased with each new picture. The irritating feeling forced him to squeeze his eyes shut, and a groan left his sore body. His head was dizzy and his thoughts foggy. A confused frown appeared on his face when he found the somehow distant memory of the attack. When he opened his eyes once again, he was facing 5 orbs, examining him carefully. Rin moved closer and placed his glowing hand on the teen's head, carefully inspecting his state. You should rest a little. A small amount of sedative is still in your system. The next shift will arrive soon, and we can head back to Konoha. Sleep and rest until then. It's okay, I can help. Naruto moved to get up, but he felt 2 small hands gently pushing him down back to the bed. No, you stay here. We will be fine. The way back to Konoha will be long and I doubt anyone wants to tote your unconscious body. Naruto let out a defeated sigh and finally nodded, sinking back to the bed. At least he could figure out what had happened. Jiraiya nodded and ushered out the 2 young shinobi, but he stepped back to the bed. Everything all right? Naruto raised an eyebrow, not sure what he was talking about. You looked like you saw a dead man when I stepped in. The blonde started to chuckle and slowly shook his head. Why, yes, something like that. I was just relieved to see you in one piece. Jiraiya frowned, watching the teen for a long moment, then left the room after he nodded. The sage slowly closed the door and leaned against it. He folded his arms and started to stroke his chin, thinking about the reaction. Naruto let out a weary sigh and his orbs traveled toward the door, where he could still sense Jiraiya's disturbed chakra signature. He suddenly felt very tired, like after a whole day of training with an army of shadow clones, and their collective exhaustion hit him when they disappeared. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand and let himself sink back to his mindscape to finally figure out what the hell was going on. Sleeping can wait, but this can't. He dragged himself to the nearest osier tree and slowly sank down to the ground, leaning against the raw surface. Kurama moved closer and laid down in front of him, his giant red eyes still filled with irritation. So, what the hell happened? If you couldn't figure it out by yourself with your pathetic human brain, we are in the past. To be exact, we have got a little more than 10 months until your birth, Kurama stated with an obviously annoyed tone. I don't get it. I really don't remember what happened. Are you really sure that bastard didn't get us with his Sharingan? The fox only rolled his eyes in annoyance. No, I'm certain. Everything feels too real to be a genjutsu. Everybody acts like they used to. It's too real and I already tried to dismiss it. Naruto shook his head. It is still more believable that Madara was able to create something like this than time traveling. The last thing I remember from the fight with that bastard is that I hit him with my Rasengan, but after that it's just blank. I'm afraid I can't answer that. I also have no idea how on earth this could be possible. You are a Bijou, the strongest of all. How could it be that even you don't know what happened? Naruto rubbed his head, forcing his brain to work, while Kurama narrowed his eyes. Why the hell did I even lose my memories in the first place? Naruto glanced up to Kurama, still rubbing his head in the hope that it would bring back the memories of how the hell they got here. Kurama let out a sigh. You were acting like someone insane back in the hospital, so I thought it would be a good idea to evade some sensitive questions and gain some time. It was easy after you passed out. But as always, you messed up everything. Kurama let out a frustrated snort and looked away from the confused blonde. What did you do? I made a mental barrier for your memories, together with some of your sensitive knowledge. Naruto frowned. My knowledge? Just think about how would they react if you started throwing Rasengans, or you used my chakra, or your sage mode? That would just ruin my every effort to stay out of sight after your little scene in the hospital. But you messed up my plan. You made another barrier by yourself with your idiotic brain. Naruto raised an eyebrow. I wanted to dismiss the barrier when things calmed down after the interrogation, but you and your stubborn brain were stronger than I thought. I have to admit, I underestimated your will. You were denying your memories, and when I was finally able to push something out, to force you to release your mental block, you resisted like an insane every time I tried to break out. And by the way, you locked me up for 3 long months. Kurama barked the last out in anger while Naruto sent an apologetic smile toward the fox. Sorry. It wasn't intentional. The blonde folded his arms and crossed his legs, concentrating and thoughtfully tapped on his cheek. So you mean, when I, or rather Toriku, determined that he didn't want to remember, I made another mental barrier over yours? Kurama nodded as an answer. Naruto thought back to the fight with the IWA Neens, when he saw the pure hatred in those eyes. In Kakashi's eyes and in Kitsuchi's eyes. Something broke in him. At that very moment he saw again when Ino died, when he tried to give shoulder to Sakura, when he promised her that he would bring peace. At that very moment he determined that he would free the commander and Kakashi from the circle of hatred and bring peace. He understood it now. When he finally accepted his legacy, his memories, he stopped denying and shutting out Kurama's attempts to break out of his barrier. How typical. He was the one who messed up, the one restraining his own memories. Actually, you made 2 barriers. The kitsune spit the words out like they were sour poison, and Naruto raised a confused eyebrow. I was finally able to almost dismiss your first one when the men in Kushina reacted to my presence back in Kumo. You were lucky I was able to push out enough chakra to heal your wound, thanks to my other self. That would have been a perfect cover for us. But no, you had to freak out, and lock me up again with that damn second barrier. Kurama stretched out his spine and placed his enormous head onto his crossed front legs and yawed, while his enormous red eyes flashed dangerously toward the young boy. You didn't help me either. Geez. You acted like you wanted to tear me to shreds behind that damn door. How on earth wouldn't I freak out? You could have just told me that you were behind that damn door, and I would have opened it immediately. You just don't understand how a mental barrier works. It was your projection and not me. When we are finally finished, you should go see a psychologist. You are freaky. Like you got any right to complain about that. Kurama turned his head away from him with an irritated ch, but Naruto already forgot about the insult and frowned. He'd still have the weekly checkups with Inoichi. So we are really in the past? Kurama only nodded and Naruto made a wondering expression, as the thought finally sank into his mind and he realized what that really meant. We can change things. The fox nodded again, watching Naruto as his face moved to an odd grimace by the overwhelming possibilities. You can. But if you change too much, you won't know what will happen. Maybe you already messed up something important. Naruto nodded in understanding, but the wide grin never left his face. There is so much in my mind. But I know one thing for sure. We have to get the real Madara while he is weak. Rin's alive, so Obito must be still himself. If we get to him in time, everything will be alright. You won't devastate Konoha, Mom and Dad won't have to die, and Naruto froze for a moment. They won't have to die. They are alive. They are still alive. A relieved, tender smile appeared on his face, and he slowly raised his hand and touched the place where he remembered Kushina had placed a gentle kiss on his forehead when they had met for the first time. Kurama rolled his eyes and barked toward Naruto. Erase that idiotic expression from your face. This is serious. Naruto shook his head and desperately tried to concentrate on their problem. So what do you think we should do? Keep a low profile. I don't think it's a good idea to do that again and shut out who you are. And absolutely not before you've been conceived. I really don't know what would happen to you if that didn't occur. Naruto furrowed his brows. What will we do about Inoichi? Kurama rolled his eyes. I will take care of that problem. Naruto narrowed his eyes and suspiciously eyed his fluffy tenant. If you could take care of Inoichi, why the hell did you lock out my memories in the first place? Because you were acting insane and on the verge of going rogue. The others would have killed you. Even the third was tense. I thought it would be best if you took a long rest until I figured out what we should do. And not to mention, with that small little act from me you gained a new identity. What do you think? How on earth would you answer the interrogators? You would never be able to deceive them. I just gave you a perfect cover. Plus it was fun. At least for the first 2 weeks. The last part of the sentence died to a frustrated grumble. Naruto couldn't help it and burst out laughing, but he immediately stopped when a razor-sharp claw landed between his legs and the red eyes glowed dangerously. The blonde gulped and sent an apologetic look toward the fox. And what did you figure out in the last 3 months? Nothing, because you locked me up, and I was occupied with trying to break your stupid mental barriers. The Bijou snorted with fury and Naruto chose not to poke him more. What if we just tell everything to Gigi? Or to Jiraiya? He trusts me. Minato won't need to know until I'm conceived. Kurama slowly shook his head and he finally removed his fang dangerously close to his legs as a last warning. This Hiruzen isn't the same one you knew. He would immediately send you back for another round of interrogation, and I doubt they would be as gentle this time as they were. This time, he saw you as a possible threat if you didn't notice already. And Jiraiya, you know very well that the only reason he is your sensei now is to take you out if you go rogue. Plus, think about it. Would you believe your own story? That you are from the future? Besides, it's almost New Year's Eve. You should be conceived soon if you haven't already messed that up. Naruto nodded, agreeing, but his heart squeezed when he thought back to the suspicious and cold eyes of the third. He missed the old Hokage. Not this one here in this time, that one who looked at him with care and love. The blonde let out a weary sigh and his thoughts migrated toward his parents. I think my parents are getting on well. Naruto tilted his head and made a wondering look, earning a disgusted snort from the fox. Don't remind me of anything like that. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. This will be more problematic than I first thought. Kurama nodded and stretched out. Leave now. I'm worn out. It was a pain in the ass to get rid of your stupid mental barriers. Naruto nodded, got up and tapped the paw of his orange friend, who let out an irritated snort as an answer. A knowing smile appeared on his face. Kurama would never admit that he was relieved to see him again, moreover happy, but he knew how to read between the lines. After all these years and still acting like the frightening. Naruto stretched out his arms and let the fox alone, not aware of the small smile that spread across Kurama's face, and he let out a relieved sigh. Idiot brat, Kurama muttered quietly and turned around to finally get a well-deserved nap. Naruto slept for 3 hours before he got up, changed his clothes, and started to look for the others. It only took a second after he spread his chakra around to find everybody on the roof. He stretched his still aching muscles and headed toward the roof of the post. Morning again. The three looked toward him as he dragged himself over the side of the roof and groaned when his sore muscles almost squeaked by his movement. Kurama, could you speed up the healing a little? I'm sleeping. Bear it. It's not like you will die because of it anyway. Naruto let out an irritated ch. Thankfully no one noticed it. How are you feeling, Toriku? Rin moved closer to Naruto, who sat down on the edge and started to massage the aching muscles in his leg. Fine, discounting that my body feels like lead. Rin only nodded. That's mostly because of the sedative. Kakashi turned toward the blonde and folded his arms in front of his chest. What happened before we arrived? Naruto placed his right ankle to his left knee, massaging his calf and frowning while he gathered his thoughts to answer. It's a little bit foggy before you appeared, but maybe half an hour before you came I woke up. Thankfully they didn't notice it, so I had some time to gather myself. You should have seen their faces when I kicked their asses, Databayo. Kakashi only rolled his eyes in irritation. You were barely able to stand straight when we got there, so don't draw the long bow. Naruto only shrugged. Okay, I made 5 pathetic clones, they released me, then I agonized behind a wobbling barrier for 10 minutes before they beat the crap out of me. Satisfied? Naruto folded his arms and turned away from Kakashi with a pout, sulking like a kid. Jiraiya watched him carefully and his doubts about him started to ease as he saw the very familiar reaction. You've done well. He moved closer and ruffled his blonde locks. The sulky expression immediately melted away from his face, replaced with a smile. Thanks for coming after me. His 3 comrades raised an eyebrow, but didn't answer until Jiraiya let out a small chuckle. You know, I don't want to think about what Minato would do to me if I had lost you. A cheeky smile appeared on Naruto's face. I got some ideas for a proper punishment for you if that ever happens. The blonde chuckled and Jiraiya grimaced in annoyance. Cheeky little brat. He folded his arms and turned away from the blonde, whose chuckle only raised by the childish reaction he missed so much. He finally let out a sigh, watching the back of the with a warm expression until he slowly closed his eyes. You will die because of your old age this time. I swear. Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, stood motionless behind the two-way mirror, staring at the unconscious Iwa Kunoichi next to the table, leaning against her bonds in the chair. He was surprised that the woman bore the interrogation for this long. She was exhausted and unconscious when the prison toad arrived with them a little more than 12 hours ago. The medics healed her enough to regain consciousness after she was hit by a ration jutsu. She just blacked out again from exhaustion. Minato glanced toward Inoichi, who only shook his head slowly and left the room, leaving the Kunoichi alone. Only a second after the door closed behind him, 2 ANBU appeared next to the woman, but within the next second they were gone together with the captive. The Hokage turned his head toward the interrogator who stepped inside the observing room. She was too exhausted. I didn't have enough time to even remember her before yesterday. Inoichi turned toward the worry-filled face of Minato. Don't worry. Toriku is okay. I may not have been able to reach her older memories, but you should be proud. He fought hard. Besides some cracks on his pride and some bruises, he is okay. A small smile appeared on Minato's face. I know. He is strong. But I'm worried, how could this ever happen? The Hokage stared inside the empty room for a long minute, then the leading interrogator Makoto stepped inside the observation room and stopped next to the blonde leader. Hokage-sama. Inoichi-san could continue with the commander. I'm finished with him. Unfortunately, he is well trained. The only thing I could get out of him was his name and his rank. Kitsuchi, second commander of Iwa's shinobi forces. I think it's time for us to step it up to the next level. Makoto turned toward Inoichi, while Minato nodded and made a short chain of hand signs. An ANBU appeared next to him, with a light bow. Hokage-sama. Bring the commander inside. The ANBU nodded and disappeared from the small room without a word. The Hokage let out a weary sigh and massaged the bridge of his nose with closed eyes, waiting for the ANBU to finally bring the commander. After a long minute of silence, he opened his eyes, watching as the ANBU reappeared with the captive, securing him to the chair, and disappearing from the room after he finished. Minato slowly turned toward Inoichi and nodded, giving a silent order to the man. The yellow flash of Konoha watched the process with thoughtful eyes, waiting patiently for the interrogator to finish his work. Minato stayed motionless for a long hour, fixing his gaze on the two men on the other side of the glass. Inoichi finally opened his eyes and stepped back from the heavily panting captive. The clothes of Kitsuchi were soaked with his sweat, sticking onto his brawny body. His brown eyes moved toward the mirror, eyeing his own panting reflection while he tried to catch his breath. The IWA shinobi shook his head to ease away the dizzy feeling in his head. He fought hard with the interrogator, but in the end he failed and the blonde shinobi easily slipped through his defense. His training was almost useless when he faced the technique of Inoichi, and the chakra bidding steels placed on his weary body weren't helping him either. Numbness started to spread across his mind. He felt the world slip to the side when his head started to spin. The sensation finally died down after a long minute, which felt like eternity, and the commander braced himself and straightened his body. Minato watched the scene, waiting for Inoichi to finally step inside the observation room and reveal what he managed to learn from their captive. He observed the shinobi in front of him, his fight to stay conscious, almost losing his battle, then in the end he finally straightened with pride in the seat. The interrogator stepped inside the room and the Hokage eyed him from head to toe. He looked obviously weary and exhausted. The Yamanaka clan's technique doesn't require a great amount of chakra, but more continuous concentration and control. Report. Minato stayed professional with his friend. Despite the fact that they'd become much closer after Toriku's sudden appearance, this is a serious situation. Yamanaka took a seat to gather his thoughts for a short second with closed eyes, before he answered. The operation was discreet. Only him, his team, and the Hokage know about it. However, it seems that he received only the most necessary information, which is odd. He is the second commander of IWA, a high-level shinobi, furthermore the relative of the third Hokage. Inoichi let out a weary sigh, while a frown appeared on Minato's face. Relatives of the Kage, this could mess up everything. Or this could be an advantage. It would depend on how he used his cards. The voice of Inoichi pulled him out of his thoughts. It seems the old geezer does not trust him enough to reveal everything about his future plans. They were just operating. What is worrisome, they already knew about Toriku's mission the day our team departed from Konoha. This wasn't just an accidental opportunity they utilized. It was planned well in advance. Inoichi let out another weary sigh and the frown became deeper on Minato's face. I'm sorry, Minato, despite his heritage they were just small fries. I found nothing about who leaked out the information about their mission. Minato nodded, his eyes fixed on the commander inside the interrogation room. Take a rest, Inoichi. I want a full report when you wake up and a full mind screen tomorrow. Maybe he's still storing some interesting information not concerned with this case. Inoichi nodded and left the room after a bow toward his friend and his respected leader. Minato waited for a long moment, and without a second thought, he left the room and entered the one behind the glass tenanting the IWA commander. The shinobi stiffened when the yellow flash of Konoha stepped inside the room, fixing his azure blue orbs on him, examining him from head to toe. Minato stayed calm, and he slowly moved closer to Kitsuchi with an emotionless face. A shiver crawled up the commander's spine when he felt the drops of cold sweat slowly run down his back, while he forced his body to move and look up to the man who stood above him. Hatred took over the fear in his weary mind. His dark eyes started to burn with the flames of hate. His face turned into a mask of anger. His dark eyes locked with the azure blue orbs of the feared shinobi, the man who was directly responsible for the death of his wife and hundreds of his comrades. A soundless battle started between the two men. A battle of wills. The one to break eye contact first would lose. The sting in Kitsuchi's eyes increased, but he forced down the urge to blink. His eyes darkened when the picture of his laughing wife popped up in his mind, replaced by the image of his daughter, the small and fragile form of Kuratsuchi, who will grow up without a mother and maybe without a father. The dark eyes become haunted behind the flames of hatred, behind the urge of vengeance. Suddenly the emotionless mask of the Hokage melted away, sadness spread across his face, and his ocean blue orbs mirrored only pity toward the captive. Kitsuchi suddenly felt himself back at Kusa, lying in the dirt, his body secured with wires, glancing up to a very similar blonde shinobi. The same look, the same sparkle in their eyes, the same pity. Did you lose someone in the war? The IWA commander flinched when Minato's voice reached his ears and immediately averted his gaze, mentally cursing because of his softness, but the increasing sorrow slowly pushed out his other emotions. They stayed in complete silence for a long minute, before Katsuchi's weary and cracking voice broke it. I did. Then why? Why do you and your Kage threaten the peace between our nations? The IWA shinobi stayed in silence. Despite the vicinity of the man who had caused his pain, his suffering, and his mourning for his family, his hatred had simply wilted. The last bit of his burning hatred faded away, leaving him in the deep abyss of sorrow. Katsuchi forced his emotions to the back of his head, burrowing them deep inside his mind, locking away the picture of his wife, his brother-in-law. He didn't move his head as he fixed his gaze on the streaks and curves of the wooden table in front of him. Talking about peace, while your hands are covered with the blood of my wife and hundreds of others. You and your brother are hypocrites. Minato stayed silent for a long minute, his eyes fixed on the profile of the commander in front of him. We are shinobi. Our hands, our souls are soaked in blood. The only thing that could wash it away and stop the circle of hatred is peace. With this, Minato turned around and left the room without looking back at the confused Katsuchi. Traveling back to Konoha was equal of torture. While they reached the post in one day, the way back to Konoha lasted almost two, because of his sore muscles and messed up chakra system. Kurama wasn't in a hurry to heal them completely, and Naruto got the feeling that this was his punishment for locking him up behind those barriers. The feared Bijou, the nine-tailed demon fox, was sulking like a small kid inside his mindscape, refusing every interaction. Well, he couldn't blame him, but it was still annoying to stop every 2 or 3 hours to rest at least 30 minutes on the first day, mostly a result of his trembling legs. Thankfully, Kami Kurama came to terms with him on the first night in the forest, and after a long hour of pleading he finally started to heal them properly. Aside from his annoyance at the almost continuous ache in his limbs, he was thankful for the 2-day delay before he arrived back in Konoha. His thoughts moved back to Sakura and he finally realized that his friends, almost every one of his friends, didn't exist here. At least not as he knew them. Kakashi was here, not much different from the adult one. Jiraiya, well, he was the same wonky pervert he remembered and loved so much. But the others didn't even know about him. Most of them weren't born or even conceived yet. No old friends. However, there were no insane, megalomaniac, immortal Uchiha and no brainless monsters with 10 tails. Only a snake and hopefully a very old and weaker version of Madara, without that annoying ability to rebuild his body countless times. He shook his head. He would have enough time to carefully think over everything when they reached Konoha. He needed to rest after this mission for sure, and it would provide a great opportunity to settle down to plan what he would need to do. And how. A sad smile appeared on his face as he watched the back of the Sannin in front of him. He slowly turned his head to the right where, at that moment, Kakashi hopped on a branch to jump to another one. The sadness slowly faded away and a grin spread across his face. Seeing his long-dead perverted sensei was a shock. Seeing Kakashi as a teenager, maybe around 14 or 15, was fun. Poking him continuously was just priceless. A thought started to form in his mind of how he would kick his ass during their next spar, and a devilish chuckle echoed in his mind at the thought. How should he get vengeance for the indignity of the 1,000 years of pain technique? Kakashi frowned when he glanced toward the grinning Naruto. What? Nothing, just daydreaming. The Jounin narrowed his eyes suspiciously when Naruto burst out laughing with a small evil hint in his voice. He let out a satisfied sigh and the numb smile never left his face. He was so happy. So calm, relieved, a sensation he hadn't felt for a long time. He felt like he found something he lost a long time ago. His old self, his cheerful, big-mouthed, joking self. Enormous amounts of thankfulness flushed through him towards someone he never even met or known. Toriku, thank you? He just wanted to enjoy this peace around him for a bit more. Konoha was here, with all her pride. His loved ones are all alive and he would be sure that they stayed that way, along with everybody he cares for. They will bear a new and better future. Determination appeared on his face, and he jumped forward yelling to the world, punching the air, not bothering himself with the confused looks behind him. He got a second chance, and there was no way on earth that he would fail. Chapter 13. Reunion and Visits. D. Remy. Together we shared a bond not even death would violate. D. Remy, there once was a boy. The gates. Naruto slowed down, almost stopped, But when Jiraiya sent a raised eyebrow toward him, he just grinned back and continued his way toward the two giant wings. A nostalgic feeling arose inside him when he looked toward the small post next to the gate, looking for a black-haired Chunin with a bandage running across his face and his ever-present companion with hair held down in front of one eye by his eight. Suddenly he realized that they couldn't be here because they'd probably just graduated from the academy. He glanced toward the desk and found two shinobi behind it, as per usual, but the scene forced him to blink. A very young, very scarless and very bored Marino Ibiki faced their direction, at the edge of falling asleep with his head in his palm. A cheeky smile ran across Naruto's face at the sight of the feared interrogator of Konoha. Jiraiya slowly shook his head and moved closer to the interrogator, who finally turned toward them and let them pass after a quick chat. They reached the Hokage tower within minutes and Naruto became more and more nervous. He was going to meet with his father. Okay, I already met with him hundreds of times. No, it wasn't me, it was Toriko who met him. Okay, just calm yourself or they will think you got back your memories. Naruto suddenly stopped and palmed his forehead, cursing to himself, while he heard the chuckle of Kurama in the background. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, but didn't make a comment, however he noted it as another weird act after the incident with IWA. They stopped when they reached the doors of the office and Naruto forced himself to calm down when he sensed the chakra signature of his father on the other side of the door. He let out a long breath, but before they could open the door, it burst open and Minato stepped out from it, eyeing him worriedly, then clutched Naruto's hand and literally dragged the gaping boy into the office, flushing away every bit of weariness by the sudden movement. Naruto looked blankly at his father's narrowed eyes, before sneaking a peek toward Jiraiya who shrugged in response. Minato. The Hokage snapped his eyes toward Naruto's confused face, and a relieved smile ran across his face. The blonde waved toward the empty chairs and they finally moved to sit down. Minato watched them carefully, one by one. Naruto exploited Minato's focus on the others to carefully examine his living and breathing father. His eyes, his features, his hair, his scent, the sound of his heartbeats, but moreover, the warm feeling of his chakra. It felt so alive, so powerful, yet still soothing, harsh, yet childishly playful like a warm spring breeze ruffling his hair teasingly. He heard the muffled voice of Kurama at the back of his head, but it became more and more distant, until it finally died down completely. His consciousness spirited away from the office, he could only see and smile to the face of Minato. The familiar face, looking back at him like he was an idiot. Naruto blinked and turned his head in the office to see that everyone was looking at him with an odd expression, waiting for something from him. He raised his hand and scratched his cheeks and a sheepish smile ran across his face. Sorry. I kind of spaced out. Minato rolled his eyes and let out a weary sigh. I said that I will need a detailed report from you about what had happened. Oh. Okay. Are you sure you are all right? You look kind of I don't even know how to describe it. Musing? Kakashi offered the word and Minato nodded, while Naruto only scratched his head. Well, yeah? I've been feeling kinda funny, you know. But I'm okay. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes and made a knowing look to Minato, who noticed the meaning immediately. The sparkling in his eyes immediately paled, but not to a noticeable level. At least not to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but Jiraiya had seen it. Minato let out a sigh and started to massage his forehead. Okay. You are dismissed. Toriku, I'll check on you later. Jiraiya, a minute. The three young shinobi left the office after a short goodbye, and Naruto glanced toward his father for a last time before he closed the door with a small smile on his face. Minato stood up and moved in front of the desk and sat on the top of it, eyeing Jiraiya curiously. I would recommend a checkup with Inoichi as soon as possible. Minato narrowed his eyes to the Sannin. Why? He's been acting strange in the last 2 days while we were traveling. He was too quiet, and he spaced out all the time, even when he's looking at something. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, and I really hope I am. But Rin also told me something strange. When he first woke up, she thought he didn't recognize her. Plus, when he saw me right after that, I really thought I couldn't even place his reaction. I really don't know, maybe it is only because of the sedative, or the after effect of what happened to him, but I suggest you make him an appointment. For safety's sake. Minato let out a weary sigh and walked to the wide windows of his office, eyeing his old team on the square in front of the Hokage tower, watching when Toriku obviously made a poke to Kakashi, who angrily tried to snap the blonde on the back of his head, but he easily evaded the playful attempt, laughing and pointing toward the young jounin. Minato closed his eyes and let out another sigh, as they disappeared behind a corner. Make it so. Talk to Inoichi. I will bring Toriku in half an hour. I want to be there. Sannin nodded, however Minato still showed his back to him. Minato. I really hope this is just my imagination, but if it's not, Minato's eye twitched, but he nodded, still not showing his face to his once sensei. When Jiraiya finally left the office without a word, he leaned his forehead on the window, resting it on its cold surface in the hope that it would calm his burning thoughts and raise fear. Shit. Minato let out a sigh at the doorstep of Toriku's apartment. He could feel the calm chakra signature of his brother inside the small bedroom, probably sleeping, and now he was here to drag him to Inoichi. The Hokage closed his eyes and hardened his own emotions for the sake of the village, then knocked on the pale orange door. He felt a small spike of chakra when the blonde finally woke up, and he felt as he slowly moved toward the door. He couldn't help it. A warm smile appeared on his face when he faced two sheepish, blue eyes, under a very untidy mess of blonde hair. His eyes were only halfway open, still foggy from his dream, and a wide yawn left him when he opened the door to Minato. Hi. It's not like I'm not happy to see you again, but is something wrong? Naruto blinked sleepily toward Minato. Sorry, but there is something that can't wait. Naruto stretched out his arms and yawned before he stepped out of the way to let Minato enter. Naruto scratched the back of his head, blinking continuously to ease away his weariness. I'm really sorry, but we need to visit Inoichi. It's a routine for everyone who has been captured. Naruto blinked and his foggy brain immediately cleared, but unlike Minato's expectations, it mirrored only annoyance and not fear or betrayal. A small web of relief spread toward his thoughts. Couldn't we make it right after we had arrived? If you have doubts and think that the IWA means messed up something in my already messed up head during their little hospitality, why didn't you just say it right then? Man. I really had a sweet dream this time. Minato couldn't find any inconsistencies, couldn't tell that he was no longer looking at Toriku. Naruto had little trouble putting on Toriku's cheerful act. He had worn the jolly mask since childhood after all. He had made and started to wear the mask of cheerfulness long ago, even when the only thing he wanted to do was to just crawl into a corner and cry. The ability to put on such an act was so automatic that he could put a real actor to shame. With time, his mask had transformed into real happiness, but if the mask was ever needed, it was easily put into place. Acting outside his real feelings and putting up a mask to hide his real emotions was one thing. Lying to them was another. Lying straight to Minato's face, he wasn't sure he could do that. While his appearance showed simple annoyance, his thoughts raced with each other, running through several possibilities as he suppressed his starting panic. They know. Just play along. I will take care of the rest. If you think they might discover that you're lying, just change the subject, or act like the idiot you are. Naruto restrained a retort. Instead, he yawned one more time and slowly walked back to the bedroom to grab a t-shirt and pants, pulling them onto his body and walking casually back to Minato. Can we use your Hiraishin this time? I'm really not in the mood to drag myself to the other side of the village. The fourth chuckled as a soft smile spread on his face. He placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder, and they were gone in a blink of an eye from the empty apartment. Inoichi was already waiting a little nervously in the familiar room of the interrogation and torture department, leaning against the wall with closed eyes. When Jiraiya appeared at his home, requesting an out-of-turn checkup on Toriku, he felt his heart stop for a second. He let out a sigh and folded his arms in front of his chest. In the last month he had really befriended the cheerful blonde. They even met outside their weekly checkups for a ramen. To his surprise, Toriku was encouraging him when he finally confessed that he wanted to run a small business, and his wife continuously suggested a flower shop. It didn't matter how awkward it was that the leading interrogator was interested in flowers. Toriku never showed anything other than some small joke about it. But now he really hoped it was only a false alarm due to the IWA scum he'd worked on before. He would really miss the boy if he regained his memories and it pointed toward him being a threat to Konoha. Inoichi let out a sigh, and at that moment the door opened and Minato stepped inside the small room together with the smiling Toriku. Relief ran through Inoichi as he watched the still cheerful teen, calling him Ajizan, waving his hand enthusiastically. Toriku-kun, take a seat. I promise. The blonde nodded, still smiling, and just hopped down to the chair and closed his eyes. Inoichi stepped closer, placed his hands on Naruto's forehead and felt a small vibration as a shiver ran through the blonde's body when he entered the well-known mindscape. The interrogator quickly passed by his basic knowledge without pause to enter the door, hiding the boy's memories. The landscape had changed a lot since his first visit. Unlike his first time in the White Sand Garden, his mindscape slowly changed little by little with each visit. For the second time, the sky became bluer. During his third visit, he found small blades of green grass here and there, under the soft white sand, stretching out toward the azure blue sky and the puffy clouds. During his last visit, there were several bigger green spots slowly blending together, and he was sure with time, the white sand, the ruins of his old memories, would disappear under the already slowly growing meadow, spotted with wild flowers. Inoichi stepped onto the soft grass, watching as it slowly rolled in the warm breeze, and the scent of lilies immediately hit his nose. He quickly took in the sight of the green fields, making a note to himself about the fewer and fewer white dunes here and there, and finally moving toward the increasing amount of shelves a little ways from the door. The interrogator walked through a small field, filled with dandelions, his footsteps stirring the white balls and filling the air puffy parachutes as they slowly whirled around his head, playfully circling his body. Just like last time, he ran his fingers through the titles and he let out a breath in his relief. He wasn't aware he was holding back when he found the oldest date in a file. The day they first met. A smile ran across his features when he left Torika's mindscape without a second thought to face the curiously shining blue orbs, completely unaware of the small, almost invisible wave in a small spot of the landscape when he dismissed his jutsu. It's okay. Nothing is messed up. A wide grin appeared on Naruto's face, but it was immediately replaced with a wide yawn. That's it, that was all you had to do? A genjutsu in my mindscape? Why didn't you just do that in the first place? Kurama let out an irritated snort. You are dense as always. If I tried to hide your memories, it would have been obvious, and treated you as a threat. That, combined with the fact that you are a terrible liar, meant that that course of action was not an option. I still don't see why I can't just tell them the truth, Naruto mumbled to himself with a mental pout. Because they would think you are insane, or that you really are a threat. For example, if you just tell them information you shouldn't know, what would be their first reaction? That you are a damn spy. I'm not saying that with time you can't tell them, but now isn't the time. The less people know about you, the safer. If they know what's going to happen, then they're going to act differently, and we can throw out our knowledge. That's why I've been telling you to keep a low profile. You could endanger someone's life, even their birth. Your own conception, for example. Naruto nodded physically, maybe a little too fast, and the two blonde men in the room mistook his movement, as if his head dropped from exhaustion. You look tired, Naruto blinked as he registered the room. Yeah, I'm gonna drop with fatigue. Can I go back now? Minato smiled as a great burden lifted from his shoulders and waved to his little brother with a soft, relieved smile on his face. Come on, I'll give you a lift. Minato clasped his arm around Torika's shoulders and they were gone, leaving the blinking Inoichi alone without a word. The two blondes appeared in the middle of the apartment, and Naruto turned toward his bedroom, to finally get his well-deserved sleep, when he suddenly stopped and turned to the Hokage. Minato, he started softly, eyeing the floor, while the yellow flash of Konoha frowned. Next time, if your suspicions rise again, just ask me, okay? I know I was acting weird in the last 2 days, but I got a reason for that. You should have just asked. I will never harm you or Konoha. An apologetic expression appeared on Minato's face, and stepped to his brother, and placed his 2 hands on his shoulders. I'm sorry. For the biggest surprise, Minato stepped closer and his 2 hands met at Naruto's back in a tight hug. Naruto froze, his heartbeat increased, then finally he let his body relax, almost melting in the arms of his father. He hesitantly raised his own arms to hug back, but the moment was over and Minato stepped backward, releasing him, before he could finish his movement. Only frustration stayed in his mind and not the warm sensation which was there only a second ago. Naruto watched as the softly smiling Minato disappeared from his room. Rubbing his aching eyes with his hands, he let out a weary sigh and turned around to finally fall onto his bed with his clothes on and his mind blank. Meantime, in the Hokage Tower, Jiraiya paced back and forth between 2 walls, impatiently waiting for Minato's return with the results. His long, spiky, pure white ponytail swayed on his back with the rhythm of his not too graceful footsteps. The Sannin froze when Minato finally stepped inside his own office, and the Yondaime noted the curious, concerned and demanding eyes of his teacher, as he slowly walked toward his wooden desk and slumped into the soft chair. Jiraiya's nerves nearly tensed to the breaking point by the obvious stonewalling, but he mimicked his student and also slumped into the nearest chair with a revived sigh when Minato smiled and nodded. His memories are as missing as always. It was a false alarm. Jiraiya let out another sigh, but a frown appeared on his face. Then I really don't get his previous reactions and behaviors. Minato slowly shook his head. Me neither. But when I talked with him now, I didn't find any suspicious reaction. Based on Inoichi's report, he reassured me that there is no way a mere human could hide anything from him when entering directly into the mindscape. Jiraiya nodded, but the frown stayed on his features when Minato changed the subject. How is the progress with his scroll? The frown deepened on Jiraiya's face, and he rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'm still fighting with the last two parts. Minato nodded, and they stayed in silence for a long minute. Their peace was interrupted a bit when a half-smile appeared on Jiraiya's face. You know what, Minato? When he quoted again from my book at Kumo, I believed in him. Minato mirrored the small smile. Yeah, I know what you mean. The first beams of the rising sun slowly stroked his forehead, until it reached the line of his eyes. The eyelids twitched at the uneasy feeling, and his mind started to process his surroundings as the sleep slowly started to fade away and the fog cleared away from his brain. Naruto let out a frustrated groan and bore himself further into the soft pillow to evade the stinging light in his eyes. He stayed motionless for a long minute in a hope to shift back to sleep, but he finally gave up. An enormous yawn left his mouth as he turned on his back, stretching out and scratching his belly under the rumpled shirt. I thought you would never get up. Lazy bastard. How long have I was out? For 16 hours. It's almost 7 in the morning. I'm bored to death. Naruto chuckled and sent an apologetic thought back to his never-missing companion. I was exhausted. Naruto frowned and sank into his mindscape to talk with Kurama, who rested his head on his giant paws. We should start to think of a plan. The fox only nodded. There are a lot of things we must take care of. Obito is out there, maybe already influenced by that bastard. Nagato may still be himself, and Yahiko's still alive. Tsunade is out of the village. Shikaka may already be sealed inside Gaara in his mother's womb. The other, and the Biju Orochimaru, the Uchihas, the Hyugas. Naruto scratched his face, still frowning as he buried himself in his thoughts. We should eliminate Obito and Madara as soon as possible. That must be the first priority. Everything else can wait. Naruto frowned and sat down in front of Kurama's crossed legs, leaning his chin on his palm. Madara could be anywhere. Maybe far away from the borders. We know only about 3 times when we could strike. When Rin dies, after Yahiko's death, and Aim, and your birth. Just leave things as they should be. Our best chance is on the 10th of October. At that time, only Obito will be alive, and he alone is an easier fly to catch than the two together. Naruto stayed in silence for a long minute, his face moved into an emotionless mask before it mirrored only sadness. His soft voice filled the landscape around him. You speak about greater good. Sacrificing Rin, Yahiko, shoved Kakashi into despair, Obito and Nagato into insanity, risking the life of my parents, maybe hundreds who could be killed when you appear in Konoha. Let Orochimaru act free for almost a year. Who knows how much blood will strain his hands? Civilians, children, I can't just sit and wait. You can't weigh human life that easily. Maybe hundreds of lives for the lives of thousands. An acceptable sacrifice. I can save them without sacrificing anybody. I must. You can't save everyone. You are still the ideologist. And you are still underestimating me. We had a lot of time. Almost a year. You already changed a lot of things. Naruto frowned and nodded. Be met only once with Minato, Kitsuchi never got caught by Konoha, and who knows what other small things he had already changed that would influence the outcome by his mere presence. We have to remake the Shinobi Alliance. That must be done in time. The fox let out a doubting snort. Humans are different this time. The alliance formed only because there was a common enemy. This time, there is no one. There is. They just didn't know about him. Kurama narrowed his eyes. What's on your mind? Naruto slowly shook his head, also not sure himself. I don't know yet. But the alliances between the nations must be tightened. The time is perfect for that with the peace talks. Naruto looked down to his hands, gathering his thoughts, prioritizing the upcoming events that he knew about. Let me remind you of something. You aren't the politician type. It requires a calm head, and that is what you lack the most. You can act politely only if your life depends on it. Sometimes that threat wasn't even enough. Kurama snorted and shook his head. For now, just stay out of sight until we have a decent plan. We must focus on Madara. Naruto slowly nodded and rose from his position and left his mind. I know. He whispered softly, glancing out his window toward the blue sky. A long scroll lay on the mahogany desk, shrouding its fine surface from the eyes. A man in black and gray robes examined its content with narrowed eyes. The report about his last attempt to get rid of a possible threat to Konoha. Danzo slowly rolled up the scroll and placed it on the corner of his empty desk. The old veteran closed his eyes and stayed motionless for long minutes while he considered his last move, to prepare a new one. His spies and undercover men all over the village report every move of the suddenly appeared new Chunin. His relationship with the Namikaze was never announced officially, but thanks to a very useful nurse in the hospital, Danzo received copies of the blood test results. Brothers, the council member frowned at the thought when he sent out this information to IWA, together with his report and the date when the boy would be near the borders. He really hoped that they could get rid of him, and immediately it would also open a new gate for him to finally take his seat as the Godame. It was supposed to be a clean job, without any connection to him, but of course they were incompetent. No foreign shinobi could surpass his elites. The frown deepened on his already wrinkled face. If you want something to be done, you have to do it yourself. The war veteran rose from his seat and left the room. The muffled voice of his long robes as the hard textile rubbed against each other was the only sound. Not even his footsteps echoed in the forsaken passageway. Naruto stood still in front of a familiar door which led to his neighbor. He felt two familiar chakra signatures inside the apartment, one man, who he already met personally, and another one, soft, warm and flawless like the finest silk. His arm hesitantly moved toward the door, only to stop there before he could knock. A worried sigh left his soft lips, and he forced his muscles to finally move. 2 muffled knocks was all he could manage to force out of his arm before it fell limply next to his torso. Naruto closed his eyes and an unconscious gulp forced itself down his dry throat, reminding him to wet his cotton-thick mouth and lick his deserted lips. A small chakra spike could be sensed inside the apartment, and light, almost soundless footsteps approached the door, which slowly opened and a blonde tuft stuck out his head. A soft smile appeared on Minato's fine features and he immediately nodded toward Naruto, inviting him inside. The Hokage slowly raised a finger to his mouth, making the universal sign to be quiet. The young time traveler slowly nodded and moved inside the living room without a sound. Minato moved inside the kitchen and Naruto utilized the opportunity without a second thought. He peeked inside the bedroom and the scene forced a warm smile on his face. He moved a step closer and leaned against the doorframe to watch his sleeping mother for a long minute. Naruto felt like he was going to melt. The graceful figure of his mother would be burned inside his retina forever, the peaceful, almost childish expression on her face, the violently glowing crimson-red river of her beautiful hair, framing her face and her whole body on the bed, hugging a big pillow like a lover. Naruto watched as her chest slowly rose and sank, while a small tuft of her ruby-red hair swayed together with the rhythm of her breath in front of her soft lips. The overwhelming sensation of peace and safety flushed through him, and he couldn't suppress an urge. He slowly moved closer, mindful not to make any noise, and crouched next to his sleeping mother. His hand rose automatically, and he gently swept away the ruby feather from her face. He carefully examined his mother's fine features. It was true that he looked very much like his father, their eyes, their hair color, and style. But there were a lot of things he inherited from his mother. His chin is more angled than Minato's, just like his mother's. His mouth was exactly the same as hers. When his fingers touched the soft, silky skin of her face, he felt an electrostatic sparkle jump toward him, but there was no pain or any uneasy feeling. Only a small tingling sensation in the tip of his fingers. Kushina flinched in her dreams, and a small frown appeared on her face. Her son slowly and gently stroked his fingers once more on her cheeks and the frown disappeared, replaced with a soft smile. Her lips parted as a soft, almost silent snore left his mother, causing Naruto to chuckle. He couldn't restrain himself anymore, and he slowly leaned forward and placed a soft kiss on his mother's forehead, and leaned back just in time before he felt a familiar presence in the door. He slowly turned his head to see his father replacing his previous position next to the doorframe, holding up 2 cups of steaming tea in both hands. Naruto nodded, sending a soft smile toward his sleeping mother before he left the room without making a sound, sneaking one last peek at his dreaming mother before he finally closed the door. Minato handed over one of the steaming cups to his son after they occupied the couch. The young blonde shinobi gratefully sipped from the hot liquid, enjoying it as it slowly warmed up his insides with closed eyes. "You look very satisfied," the Hokage pointed out, eyeing his partner while also sipping his hot tea. "I am satisfied with Databao." Minato raised an eyebrow, however Naruto couldn't see it with his still closed eyelids. "Something happened?" The blonde teen shrugged and he finally opened his eyes to lock with the identical ones of his father for a long minute before he opened his mouth to answer. "You could say that." "Is it because of your memory? About your legacy, isn't it?" That caught Naruto off guard and he exhaled his breath loudly inside his mug, sending a large amount of the steaming liquid into his lap. The Hokage suppressed a laugh, while he watched his cursing brother, as he was desperately trying to clean off as much tea from his clothes and from the couch as he could. Toriko Naruto distantly heard the name, but he recognized Minato referring to him, only after a long pause. "The pervert talks too much." A gentle smile appeared on the Hokage's face. "I'm glad that you chose something this big as a goal. And also the same as me." Naruto looked back at him with a surprised face and a raised eyebrow. "The same?" "My goal is the same as yours. To bring peace. However, I had chosen a smaller first step. My first goal is to bring peace to Konoha. Then I can move further to other countries." "That's a nice goal." A half smile appeared on Naruto's face, and his expression saddened in the end before he continued. "However, there are a lot of other people outside the village gates who also deserve peace in the other hidden villages. Shinobi suffer because of the war, because of the hatred and the vengeance burning inside them. The civilians." The young ninja slowly shook his head and sipped his tea with a wondering face, while his thoughts traveled to foreign countries in his memories, to the thousands of comrades who he fought alongside during the Fourth Great Shinobi War. Who sacrificed their lives for him, for the shinobi world, for freedom and for true life. "Minato, you're a smart man. You're the Hokage after all." The yondaime raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unusual seriousness in his voice. "Tell me, Minato, how could one man bring peace to the world? How can one man change the world?" The named blonde stayed in silence for a long minute, lost in his own thoughts before finally opening his mouth. "The world, our lives are as vast as an ocean. If you dribble only one drop of water in the middle, it will reach a great distance before it fades away. If you could convince more people, you will get more drops, and the echoes of the small waves could definitely reach the shores. Even a small drop of water can cause waves." Naruto stayed in silence, chewing his father's thoughts carefully. "I don't want small waves. I need a tsunami." Databao. Naruto grinned back to Minato, who softly chuckled and waved a hand. "A tsunami? Well, you just need to make a bigger impact, I think. You are quite good at that already." The young man rolled his eyes and playfully flung his hand toward Minato, who easily avoided the attempt to smack him on the back of his head. The two blondes chuckled softly, careful not to wake up the woman in the next room. The two men stayed in silence, sipping their tea, before Naruto broke it. "What happened with the IWA ninjas?" Minato raised an eyebrow at the sudden question. "They are at the interrogation and torture department. But unfortunately they are just small fries." The blonde chunin slowly rubbed his finger on the edge of his cup. "Why didn't they go after the others? Why was I the only target?" Minato let out a sigh and leaned back on the couch, resting his cup on his stomach while a frown appeared on his face. "Their mission was only to kidnap you. Somehow they got word of our relation, despite the fact that it wasn't announced. What worries me is that they knew specifically that you are my brother, and not just a relative. That information is classified, only a small number of people have access to it." Furthermore, the Hokage closed his eyes, and his eyebrows connected to one continuous line. "They knew about your mission. They weren't just wandering around. It was a very well-prepared ambush." Naruto sipped the last bit of his tea and leaned back on the couch after he put his cup on the table, mimicking the frown on his father's worried face. "I couldn't understand what IWA could gain by my kidnap. Blackmailing the Hokage in the middle of the peace talks? What were they thinking?" Minato slowly shook his head before he answered. Kidnapping or killing you wouldn't be just vengeance on me. It would be the demonstration of power toward the other nations. Minato let out a sigh and rubbed his forehead, before shaking his head again. You are suspecting that someone within the village informed IWA, aren't you? Minato didn't answer or move, his face not mirroring any other emotions under his troubled frown, but that was enough for Naruto to take it as a yes. Someone is trying to debilitate you from inside the walls. The Hokage finally nodded. So it would seem. Naruto closed his eyes and leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, his head flung freely between his shoulders as his mind ran through several possibilities. Who was after power in Konoha, to sacrifice someone for the cause? The Hokage's personal council? No. They were mostly a big bunch of old hags, but they wouldn't dare to make a step like this. Plus Sarutobi is also part of it now. The Uchiha Naruto narrowed his eyes at the thought, but he forced his brain to stay out of his memories of Sasuke and Madara. The Uchiha planned a rebellion, but that won't occur for almost another decade. Orochimaru had been after the Hokage hat for years before he defected from the village, but this wasn't his style. Naruto slowly shook his head to clear his thoughts, while he forced his brain to search for any hints in his memories, but nothing came. In the end, he let out a weary sigh. What will happen to them? Minato raised an eyebrow and turned toward his companion, not sure of who he was referring to. Finally, he realized he was asking about the IWA prisoners. After the interrogations finish, the council will decide their fate. Thoughts raced inside Naruto's head with insane speed, looking for any possibilities to fix what he ruined. You are the Hokage. Minato frowned and narrowed his eyes, waiting for the blonde Chunin to continue. You can act beside the council. They were just following orders, like anybody else. Like you months ago. Like me. Let them go. Please. Naruto turned toward Minato, his eyes almost begging and the frown only darkened on his face. Minato tilted his head to the side, eyeing Naruto carefully with narrowed gaze, but the blue orbs reflected wondering thoughts and nothing more as he considered his words. The Hokage straightened himself and slowly moved to the window and folded his arms behind his back. He ran his azure eyes along the village, the people walking on the streets, and his eyes finally moved toward the giant mountain in front of his window to meet his predecessors' faces. Why? Minato slowly turned around, watching his brother with a wondering face. I know I haven't got any right to ask anything like this. But I don't hold any grudge toward them. I understand them, even the attempt to kill me. I'm willing to forgive them. And if you think about it, Konoha could show mercy toward IWA, toward the Tsuchikage, and use it as a benefit during the negotiations. It wouldn't be seen as a weakness, rather the use of power of influence. Minato narrowed his eyes, frowning but considered every word of the blonde Chunin. You can benefit more if the Tsuchikage owes you one. Minato, please. If you are finished with them, let them go. I will consider it. Thank you? A relieved smile ran across Naruto's face. I didn't know you were interested in politics. It's a new passion of mine. A moment later, Naruto asked, I would like to meet with the IWA commander if it's not a problem. Minato tilted his head to the side, his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Why? Naruto only shrugged casually. We were interrupted in the middle of our conversation. Okay, I actually fainted. But I want to talk to him and finish it. Minato frowned, but nodded. Naruto answered with a nervous thank you, and moved toward the kitchen to refill their empty cups with another round of the streaming liquid, while he tried to lock out the angry and disagreeing cursing of his tenant. Minato followed his movement with a wondering face. It wasn't suspicion that rose inside of him, since it was clear after the interrogation that Toriko had nothing to do with the IWA team. No, the feeling that welled up was all that he was willing to forgive the kidnappers who had even tried to kill him. To top it off, it seemed to be the young ninja's natural instinct to save lives and rescue souls. The Hokage closed his eyes as he became lost in his own thoughts. Would I be so pure? No. I don't think so. I would utilize the opportunity to punish them. A large amount of respect built inside his mind toward the blonde Chunin despite his young age. Maybe you really could reach your goal. Minato watched his brother silently as he refilled their pot, and slowly brought it back, together with a third cup. The older blonde frowned, and at the moment he parted his lips to question it, he heard the soft ruffling of fine fabric inside the bedroom. Minato slowly shook his head, Awe and pride sparkled in his blue orbs. I will never get used to your sensing skills, Ototo. Naruto answered with a wide grin as the sensation of pride flushed his mind from his father's compliment, and he placed the 3 cups onto the small table. The door slowly opened with a muffled squeak and a ruby-red bush appeared in the gap. Kushina stepped inside the living room, her eyes half open, her orbs still foggy from her previous dream. The young Chunin's heart started to beat faster as his mother slowly eyed him from head to toe. Her eyes slowly became wider and wider until she burst toward him, almost sweeping them both to the floor. 2 soft arms folded around his frame, and this time he didn't hesitate to react. He returned the sweet embrace, clutching to her for a never-ending moment, enjoying as her sweet scent of vanilla filled his nose. He felt the heat of her body, the rough spots on her hands caused by the use of the kunai, the rhythm of her heartbeat and her breath. He felt her ruby hair tickling his own face as Kushina bore herself more and more into his neck. Naruto slowly stroked his mother's back, while he glanced toward Minato from the corner of his eye to see the gentle smile on his father's features. Torok and Naruto flinched, however the voice of his mother stroked his ears like fine silk. He gently stroked away a tuft of her ruby locks and leaned back to lock his azure blue orbs with his mother's eyes. He wanted to scream, to cry, and to tell them everything. I'm Naruto. I'm here. I'm your son. But the urge finally died down as his thoughts moved toward rationalism. Sadness and despair flushed in his eyes, but only for a moment, not enough time to be recognizable. Kushina. Is everything all right? He distantly heard his own voice as his lips moved. He still felt numb. It was strange. The first sight of his father, his living, breathing father, didn't cause this kind of reaction. Kurama's snort finally pushed him back to reality. Drama queen. That's my line, Databang. I was worried, but that idiot told me that you were tired and I couldn't go check on you. Naruto gently chuckled and took a step back. I'm alright. I was just exhausted. A wide, almost foxy grin appeared on his mother's face and Naruto couldn't suppress the urge to mimic it. Minato stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. When she heard you were kidnapped, she wanted to march to the borders by herself. A soft smile appeared on Naruto's face. I can take care of myself. I'm pretty strong, you know. Kushina only rolled her green eyes in her annoyance. You are. But just like your brother, you are also an idiot. Naruto chuckled and glanced toward the irritated face of his father. I am Hokage. Where is my respect? Kushina sent a cheeky grin toward her lover. You will get that respect if you put your soiled underwear into the laundry basket. The Hokage of Konoha no Sato gaped like a fish, frozen in place without a word, flushed brilliant red even to his ears with embarrassment, while the apartment echoed from the whinnying laughter of his son and Kushina. Naruto went through the familiar passages of the interrogation and torture department, where he had spent the first 2 weeks in the past after he finally woke up. He stepped onto the stairs, which leads to the basement, toward the cells of the 4 shinobi from IWA. He found himself facing a thick wooden door, covered with invisible security seals. However, he could still sense their presence by the tiny amount of chakra continuously leaking out from the pattern. He grabbed the handle and the seals glowed with a faint yellow light, examining the intruder, and in the end it had faded away. The door finally opened. He stepped into the passage and waved a hand to Makoto, who smiled and nodded to the blonde Chunin. He is in the last cell. When you're finished, just sign to the NBU. Naruto nodded and moved toward the end of the passage without hesitation. During his past life, he had never been down here and it didn't match with his mental picture of this place. Instead of a dark passage, cells with rusty bars, he found himself in a bright corridor, with absolutely normal-looking doors containing a large glass window in the middle. The enormous number of security seals all across the passage was the only thing indicating prison cells. He finally reached the last door and glanced inside. It was a very small and sparsely furnished room. He glanced at the IWA commander, who sat on the bed, his arms resting limply on his thighs, while his head hung freely on his giant chest. His big, brawny body was slumped, without any sign of the once proud commander of the 2nd Division of the Allied Shinobi forces during the 4th Great Ninja War. Naruto let out a long breath and opened the door with a small spike of his chakra and stepped inside the cell. He instantly felt the effects of the security seals, as in a blink, his chakra reserve was locked up and his limbs felt numb due to the lack of it. No wonder Kintsuchi seemed so weary. Naruto made a hesitant step forward and cleared his throat to gain attention, but the once proud commander stayed in the same slumped position on the bed. The blonde rolled his eyes and moved to the chair next to a small table. Exactly which part of our previous conversation couldn't reach your brain? This isn't part of keeping a low profile. Kurama let out a frustrated snort, but Naruto just made a mental shrug and dismissively waved toward him. I know what I am doing. Just let me work. I doubt it. They stayed in silence for long minutes, until the IWA shinobi finally realized that he wouldn't get rid of the blonde boy by simply ignoring his presence. What do you want? Naruto leaned back and crossed his hands behind his neck, but inside his brain a satisfied smirk appeared. Nothing. Just thought you could bear a companion. A snort left the commander's nose and he finally raised his head to look at Naruto with a blank expression. Drop the act? What do you want? You aren't an interrogator. No, I'm not. I just want to talk to you and that's all. The blank expression melted away from Kitsuchi's face and a confused frown appeared on his features. He eyed Naruto for a long minute and averted his gaze from the piercing blue eyes back to the floor. The blonde Chunin dropped his hands onto his own lap, before his soft voice filled the small room. What was her name? The eyes of the commander twitched, and his body flinched, almost invisibly, but he still fixed his eyes in front of him for a long minute before he opened his mouth to answer. Sumi, the voice of the IWA shinobi, had died down to a whisper. I'm sorry for your loss, I understand it. A skeptical ch was the only answer from the commander before he braced himself and barked out to the blonde. Don't act like you understand me. You are a shinobi of the leaf. You don't know me. My loss, my vengeance. My hatred. Konoha won the war, we lost. But next time it will be different. We will win the next war. IWA will become stronger. Naruto stayed in silence for a long minute, eyeing the tense Kitsuchi carefully. It doesn't matter where you come from. Stone or leaf, it won't matter in the end. Nor will it matter if you are from mist, cloud, or sand. Nothing will matter. Your rank, your heritage won't be concerned by the Shinigami. It will indiscriminately reach out for everyone from a powerful Hokage to a freshly graduated genin. I don't need to understand you personally. I understand the pain. The sorrow. It's common for everyone. The urge to protect your home and your loved ones. In war there are no winners, only survivors. This is what makes us the same. We are not the same. IWA is powerful. We will become more powerful and we will wipe you out. Tell me, why did the war start? To seek power. But in the end, every nation only became weaker by the loss of its people. Only one thing can stop the terror of a war, and that is peace. This is what every human being, every man, child, woman, and every shinobi is waiting for. We are shinobi. We are the same in more ways than you would ever agree. Will your vengeance bring peace to your soul? Kitsuchi stayed in silence for long minutes, and he finally looked up to meet the eyes of the young man. One man couldn't bring peace to the world. It's impossible. Naruto rose from the seat and stepped closer to the commander. Maybe. However, one man could start something and in the end reach the goal together. You, the Tsuchikage, the Hokage, the guard outside this door, we are small parts of a big domino chain. The question is, do we have the courage to finally start falling and change the shinobi world? You are insane, Naruto only shrugged and walked next to the door, knocking to the patiently waiting Anbu outside the door, who silently opened it, and the blonde stepped out. Before the door could close, Naruto glanced over his shoulders and sent a wide grin to the once commander. Perhaps, but I have the courage to fall. Kitsuchi jerked his head up and blinked after the leaving blonde Chunin, staring at the closed door for a long time, lost in his thoughts. Naruto's foot automatically moved on the thin roads to his unknown destination. He fixed his gaze on the dirt of the streets, the corners of the business flags as he wandered the morning streets of Konoha. Civilians and shinobi passed his way, one or two waved a hand to him, a shinobi gently tapped his shoulders with a wide grin on his face, and deep in his mind he recognized the man as a shin, a special jounin. They worked together 3 weeks ago next to the borders, to find the runaway child of a businessman. That mission should only be a C-class, without any danger. However, the mercantile had eagerly paid the fee of an A-class mission and requested the best censors to find his daughter. And Minato granted his wish. They found the girl near Yugakure in one of the bathhouses, enjoying her free time not so alone, and Toriku had to put paralyzed seals on the girl in order to drag her back to her father. She was only a civilian, But after their small fight, Toriko had to bandage up his bleeding arm, where the brunette had bitten into his flesh more than once. Minato and Kushina teased him for weeks after that incident. He grinned back to Shin, and after some short interaction their ways parted when they reached a small bakery. A young brown-haired brunette ran to him before he reached the corner. The daughter of the baker pushed a still warm brown bag inside his hands, blushing and nervously swinging on her heels, chatting about silly things. The same woman who after a decade would throw a piece of bread at him, while hatred flamed in her eyes. The same woman who kissed him on his cheek after he had saved the village from pain. Naruto slowly shook his head after he disappeared behind the corner, and moved toward an alley and reached a square. A group of laughing children passed beside him. One pointed a finger toward him, while he could hear the muffled whispers. "There is Yondaime. Silly. It's not him." A small smile appeared on his face, while he left the crowd and his ANBU guard hiding in the shadows. Two raven-haired men passed beside him, with stern looks on their faces, carefully examining their surroundings, the people on the streets, looking for anything suspicious. Naruto fixed his azure blue orbs on the symbol on their green vest. A shuriken with an Uchiha fan in the middle. Somewhere deep inside his memories he recognized that as the symbol of Konoha's military police force. Naruto let out a weary sigh and shook his head to ease away his thoughts from the upcoming massacre. I still got a lot of time. A young genin burst out from an alley, chasing a big, fat brown cat with a red bow toward Naruto. A nostalgic feeling ran through him while he easily caught the runaway animal, holding her up by the nape of her neck. The panting boy stopped slip in the dirt, breathing heavily. The Chunin eyed the wonky black-haired boy with the white bandages on his chin and cheeks as he caught his breath. "Thank you, Shinobi-san." A foxy grin appeared on Naruto's face. "You know, if I hand her over, you will owe me ramen." The genin narrowed his eyes, eyeing him without a word for a long minute, before he nodded and held out his small hand. "Deal. But only one bowl." Naruto nodded, and after a short handshake he handed over the struggling cat to the young shinobi, who immediately touched the small device on his neck to report to the rest of the team. "I got her, Izumo. I'm heading toward the meeting point. And Kotetsu." The boy gave a small bow to Naruto and turned around toward the Hokage tower, but before he could take a step, the desperately struggling cat ran her claws on the chubby cheeks of the genin, leaving 4 thin red lines on his face. Kotetsu automatically dropped the cat and tapped his abused chin with a painful yelp, squeezing his eyes shut. Naruto could swear that the mother or most likely grandmother of Tora grinned at him before she disappeared in an alley with the cursing boy behind her. He could hear when Kotetsu informed the rest of his team about the escape on the next rooftop. Some things never changed. The Chunin slowly shook his head, still chuckling while he walked away toward his destination. Naruto reached the border district of Konoha. He glanced up on the great walls, eyeing the patrolling squads. A sad smile ran across his eyes as they locked on a young kunoichi in the middle of her teens. Her red eyes locked with him for a second, before Kurenai gratefully ran toward the main gate. Naruto let out a sigh and dug his hands inside his pockets. His foot leading him on his way, hopefully away from his dark thoughts, away from Team 8. From Kiba. From Shino, from Hinata. Naruto shook his head to clear his thoughts just in time to avoid bumping into a tall man's back next to a high wooded wall. The man slowly turned around and gave a light bow to Naruto, who returned the gesture much deeper. While he locked his eyes to the milky orbs in front of him, recognition ran through him as he carefully, but still in low-key, eyed the very familiar man in front of him. His long black hair, the stern look on Hinata's father's face. No. Something was off on the well-known features. Naruto's eyes rested on the Hittite on the man's forehead when he realized who he was facing. He distantly felt another eye on him, and he glanced toward a tall, graceful woman, who stepped out from the entrance of the compound seconds ago and gave him a light nod. "Todoroki-san." "Hyuga-san." The Chunin blinked. Then again. His eyes locked on a small figure in the arms of the woman. A small, sleeping figure, with short raven black hair, slowly sucking his thumb in his dream. "Hizashi, let's go. Niji is tired." A ghost of a smile appeared on Naruto's face, as he eyed the small prodigy in his mother's arms and couldn't suppress a chuckle when a thin line of drool appeared on the edge of the small lips, slowly moving toward Niji's chubby chin. The tall man nodded to the woman and they left Naruto alone after a small nod, who roared with laughter inside his head. "Oh man. That was just flawless." He still chuckled when the image of the driveling Niji popped up inside his head, suppressing his last memories of the black-haired teen, leaning against his shoulder as he let out his last breath with a smile on his face. His feet moved again, moving him away from the Hyuga compound. A shiver ran through his spine when the image of a big-eyed child with black hair, dressed in a green sleeper, flew across his mind. His thoughts wandered toward a baby Tenten, and he imagined her baby version playing with a rattler made from a kunai. A soft chuckle left his mouth, but his lips curved down into a smaller and more gentle smile when another thought dug into his mind. Naruto closed his eyes and turned around to head back to the center of the village, to check on another baby, still floating in her mother's womb, waiting patiently for the moment of birth. Naruto found himself sitting on a bench, almost directly in front of a house, under an enormous and ancient cherry tree, waiting patiently for hours, for only a moment's glimpse. His head slipped from his palm for not the first time, and his foggy mind cleared again as the dream slipped away from his brain by the harsh movement. The door finally opened and he had to calm down his pounding heart when he finally saw what he was waiting for. A tall, fair-skinned, blonde-haired woman stepped out from the house with an obviously round tummy. Her green eyes locked with his own for a mere moment, and he waved a hand toward the surprised Kunoichi, who in the end left the house with a wondering face. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. "Just a little bit more, Sakura, just a little bit more, and we will meet again." Naruto found himself sitting on his well-known spot on his father's head. He rested his crossed arms on his tucked legs, watching his loved village in the afternoon light. His eyes moved toward a distant spot, where he knew he would find the Uchiha compound behind the large trees. He restrained the urge to check on his other friends. It would be almost impossible for him to sneak inside the walls, especially to those which were crowded with those creepy eyes. They would spot him in a second, and he doubted he could come up with an acceptable excuse why he was lurking and spying inside the compounds. His gaze moved toward where he knew the compound of the Inuzuka could be found. A small smile appeared on his face when he thought back to the short-tempered Kiba. Their arguments, their fights, their laughs. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head toward another comrade's compound before opening them again. The Aburames. The Naras. The Akimiki's despair and sorrow started to spread inside his mind, as he rested his sight on the village below his legs. Finally something diverted his darkening thoughts. He heard small footsteps behind the monument, deep inside the woods, as somebody was marching toward his hiding place, not aware of how much noise he was making. Naruto heard the ruffle of the unsecured clothes, the cracking of the twigs under the footsteps, the rustle of the dried leaves on the ground, and felt the spike of that someone's chakra. The spikes of a troubled, angry person. He heard a muffled thump and a painful yelp. The scent of a small amount of fresh blood reached his sensitive nose. Finally, the silhouette of a child evolved from the woods, cursing under his breath, clutching his hand on his abused fist as he tried to channel his frustration to one of the trees. However, the tree was much stronger. Nothing could prove better than the bruise and small amount of blood on his fist. The young boy hopped down to the monument, only meters from Naruto, and sat next to one of Minato's stone spikes. The blonde shinobi froze in his seat, but he forced his muscles to slowly turn his head and lock his eyes on the child next to him. The giant stone spike shrouded most of his small form. Only his grimacing face and flashing anger in his eyes was visible. The Chunin's sight froze on the dark hair of the child, the spiking ponytail, the dark, but still glowing eyes, and the long scar which ran across the bridge of his nose from cheek to cheek. His heart forgot to pound for a second, and his mouth suddenly felt drier than the deserts of Suna. Iruka. He went back immediately to Konoha to look after the children who stayed in the village, after he fled from that turtle island to join his comrades on the battlefield. The child found a small stone and threw it from the monument, toward the village. "Stupid sensei, stupid academy, stupid Hokage, stupid village," the small child angrily cursed under his breath and threw another small stone toward the village after each and every curse, weighing his words. The boy suddenly froze when he finally realized that he wasn't alone. He slowly turned his head to the side, to meet the wide and shocked cerulean eyes and the parted mouth of Naruto. They stayed in complete silence, each other frozen for their own reasons. The moment was broken by the loud laughing of the blonde and the gaping of the 10-year-old Yumino Iruka. "What's so funny?" The child hopped into his feet, pointing a finger toward the still chuckling blonde, who just waved a hand. He once sensei as a cute child, cursing and hissing the academy, his own sensei, his village, and the Hokage. His late teacher, who lectured him that he should show respect to the leaders and toward the village, because the young Uzumaki had called the Sandaime Jiji. Suddenly realization flushed through Irika's face, and a small hint of panic could be seen in his dark eyes. Why, you are the Yandames, I didn't mean to. A foxy grin appeared on Naruto's face, seeing the starting panic and the slight tremble of the small hands. Relax, kid. I'm not going to tattle. Irika relaxed his tense muscles, but his eyes still mirror suspicion. What's your name, Gaki? The child narrowed his eyes and the suspicious glance only grew. Why do you want to know? Naruto shrugged and leaned back on his back, folding his arms behind his neck, crossing his legs in a casual way, while his eyes fixed on a crystal-white puffy cloud. I'm just trying to start a conversation. Irika slowly stepped out to see his new blonde companion behind the stone spike, but in the end he decided that he really wouldn't tattle. He moved next to the laying Chunin and sat down cross-legs, still watching Naruto from the corner of his eyes. I'm Yumino Irika. Naruto sat up and held out his hand toward the child. Odoroki Toriku at your service. Irika made a confused face. Odoroki? I thought they said that you are a relative of Yandame-sama. Shouldn't you be a Namikaze? The sudden Sama tag wasn't missed by Naruto, but he just sent a gentle smile back. It's a long story. A frown appeared on the child's face, but in the end he suppressed his curiosity and stayed in silence. Su Irika-chan. What makes you curse everything? The boy folded his arms in front of his chest and snorted. I'm not a girl. Don't call me Chan. Naruto only rolled his eyes, but his blue orbs sparkled cheekily. Care to tell me, Irika-kun, what upsets you so much that you have to punch a tree? Irika tried to hide his bruised fist in embarrassment, and he felt his cheeks become redder, but in the end he reversed the movement. It doesn't matter anymore, he already knows. How did you know that? Naruto only shrugged, and Irika stayed in silence for a long minute, watching the village under his feet, when a group with green vests jumped toward the Hokage tower from rooftop to rooftop in the afternoon sunlight. I failed the academy pretest. Naruto stayed in silence, waiting for Irika to continue, but he was shocked inside. Sensei told me, if I was unable to make it on the next pretest, he won't let me apply to graduate with the early team, because of a new regulation. Naruto narrowed his eyes, eyeing the young boy next to him carefully. Why do you want to graduate early? Irika stayed in silence for a long minute before he finally opened his mouth to answer. Because I want to become stronger. To learn strong and to show them. Why? Irika finally looked up to Naruto with a confused face. Why what? Why do you want to become stronger? Because with strong I can prove myself. Sensei told me that I won't be a battle-type shinobi. He said that I haven't got the affinity for that, nor the mindset. I want to show them. Naruto let out a sigh when he saw the sour face on Irika. Maybe a small push wouldn't hurt. He heard the displeased snort of Kurama in the background. I'm sure you will do fine next year. Plus, power isn't always about flashy jutsu. You can find great powers in many different ways and places. Irika raised a curious eyebrow. Power could be found in a piece of paper, a seal, for example. Power could be found in your heart. And do you know what holds the biggest power? Irika slowly shook his head. The younger generation. The child made a confused look. I don't get it. You will one day. Naruto made a wandering face toward the blue sky. Geez. Telling this to you, I feel like an old man. I'm starting to lose my power of youth. Naruto suddenly froze. I didn't say that, did I, Dadabayo? Naruto turned toward Irika with wide eyes, and faced the confused child, while he ruffled his own blonde locks in his shock. He slowly shook his head and leaned back. Never mind. You are crazy. Normal people are boring. A soft smile appeared on Naruto's face. Hey Irika. Aren't you hungry for ramen? It's my treat. The child made a wandering look, tapping his chin, and nodded with a wide smile. Naruto straightened and ruffled the dark lock of his once-sensei, smoothing out tufts in his tidy ponytail. Naruto was followed by a cursing child, desperately trying to fix his ruined hair on the way back to the city center where Naruto could finally start to pay back his debts toward his sensei. Chapter 14. Children. Children are our legacy. Our responsibility. They are our destiny and we are theirs. Dirk Benedict. A kunai flew toward the wooden post, and a brief second later penetrated the hard surface and buried itself deep into the ground behind the pole, followed by a second weapon only meters from it. A furious snort echoed inside the empty clearing, and Naruto grabbed another kunai and a shuriken in both of his hands. He let out a long breath, then shot forward with his left hand, releasing the weapon, and a millisecond later his right hand mimicked his movement. The shuriken reached the flying kunai in the air, and a metallic clink indicated connection, which diffracted the kunai to aim directly into the bullseye on the log. A wide and satisfied smile appeared on Naruto's face after his success and punched into the air. Take that. Special Uchiha technique, my ass. Naruto let out a weary sigh and ran his hand through his blonde locks. He had been training for 3 hours to finally make this move work, but the first joys of success left him as fast as it came. The feeling was replaced by his memories. His betrayer the Chunin let out another sigh and shook his head to ease away the memories together with the ache in his heart, and he started to do what he always did when he didn't want to think, train until he drops to the ground from exhaustion. A shadow clone had appeared beside him, and they almost immediately jumped backward and moved to stance, only to jump into action a second later for an enormous taijutsu battle. Fighting against a shadow clone had its advantages. You share the same experiences, the same knowledge, you fight against the same style. Countering yourself was training for fighting against the Sharingan. You have to push yourself over the limits, and be as unpredictable as you can be to trick yourself, or you will be beaten. These thoughts ran through his mind in the blink of an eye while he made another attempt to kick his clone out of existence. The clone grabbed a missed kunai from the ground next alongside a thick log and aimed for his head with the next attack. A small tug in Naruto's consciousness caused his head to snap to the side, dropping his defense for a brief second despite his years of experience on the field. The clone's attack was unstoppable. The kunai freely dashed toward his face without anything to stop it. In the last moment, Naruto finally broke out of his temporary stasis to stop it just in time. The blonde clone froze, his identical eyes widened when his brain processed the scene. The kunai stabbed through the boss's palm. Boss Naruto slowly shook his head, observing the wound with an annoyed grimace on his face. The Chunin grabbed the kunai, and with one fluid motion, pulled the weapon from his flesh and sent it flying toward the edge of the woods, where he had sensed the movement. A rabbit ran out from under a big bush, and disappeared at the other side of the training ground. Naruto frowned in his confusion, only for it to be replaced with the annoyed grimace once more. A damn rabbit? He was just simply too preoccupied. A relieved sigh left his mouth, together with a painful hiss, as the adrenaline started to wear off, giving his body time to register the throbbing pain in his palm. Kurama, could you help me out? If I go back with a hole in my hand, Ran would skin me alive. His only answer was an irritated grumble, but the gaping hole in the middle of his palm immediately started to shrink as new tissue appeared on the edges of the wound, by the insensible amount of foreign chakra. 10 seconds later, only the pinkness of his new skin betrayed what had happened seconds before. Naruto slowly examined his raised hand, clenching then releasing a fist. After a short nod to his clone, the intense spar simply continued like nothing had happened. This time he concentrated on his clone with all of his nerves and senses, unaware of the curiously shining amber-colored eyes behind the bush. Graceful and pale fingers locked around the bloody barrel of the kunai, and the shadowy figure disappeared from the training ground with a satisfied and excited grin on his face. Hours later, Naruto felt a gentle tap on his shoulders while sitting in his favorite spot across Tsuchi's counter. Only then did the familiar warm chakra signature reach his senses, pulling him out of his previous argument with Kurama. Without turning around, he waved a hand in greeting, slurping the last remnants of his ramen, and placed his now empty bowl on top of a slowly growing pile. The ruffle of soft fabric reached his ears, and after he tapped his stomach and let out a satisfying sigh, he finally turned to the newcomer. "Hi!" he chimed, receiving a warm smile in response from Minato. "Hokage-sama. It's been a while since your last visit." The yellow flash of Konoha turned toward Tsuchi and grinned at the owner as he answered. "Yes. I had a busy weekend, Tsuchi-san. But I can't live too long without your dishes." A proud smile formed on the owner's face, and Naruto couldn't suppress the urge to roll his eyes at the obviously too sweet and too charming response. "The usual, Hokage-sama?" Minato nodded in response and turned back to the blonde, while the owner moved to the back of the small kitchen to prepare his order. "Sue, I was just wondering, are you still interested in politics?" Naruto raised a curious eyebrow and pulled his next steaming bowl of ramen in front of him, not bothering to wait for Minato's order to arrive. Sure. A wide, satisfied grin appeared on the leader's face. Then it's a deal. You will come with me. Naruto narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He knew that grin, that cunning expression on his father's face. Hardly different from his usual happy grin, an invisible twinge the only indication that he was hiding something. And exactly where are we going? To Suna. I will be meeting with the Kazekage this week. Naruto's right eye had twitched in his annoyance, however his heart also warmed at the thought of the noble dunes. But the pleasant feeling was washed away to be replaced with pervading sadness when his thoughts wandered to the last Kazekage in his own timeline. He gave himself a mental slap on his face, to knock himself back to reality in the hope that his emotional roller coaster hadn't appeared on his face. Based on Minato's still soft smile, he was successful. In the end, he eyed his leader suspiciously. And you need me again for distraction while you are chit-chatting with him, don't you? Minato only shrugged casually, and reached out to get a pair of chopsticks when Tucci reappeared behind the counter with a big bowl of steaming ramen, and silently stepped back to give his Hokage some space. Maybe, maybe not. The blonde Chunin rolled his eyes at the answer. Fine, but no mask this time. I didn't intend to order that. It was effective for the first time, but he already saw your face. It would be useless anyway. So, we will march into Suna with a full delegation? No. Just the two of us. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. He had never been out alone with his father before, and there is no way he will skip this opportunity. However, leaving Konoha in the knowledge that Orochimaru, Obito, and Madara were still at large gave him an uneasy feeling. Brat. Don't overcomplicate things. Just keep a low profile and don't mess up anything. Naruto rolled his eyes unconsciously and the Hokage raised an eyebrow. You don't want to go out with me? The eyes of the blonde Chunin widened and he immediately started to deny, supporting with wide gestures and waving hands. Of course I want to, Databeo. It would be great. Really. I was just wondering who will take care of the things here. Okay, not a total lie, but it was still enough for Minato to raise an eyebrow, before he turned to his dish. The third will take care of everything here until I am back. I don't count on being gone more than 1.5 weeks. I'm sure he is more than capable of handling it. I didn't mean that. I know he is more than capable. He ran this place for decades, the Chunin mumbled under his breath and folded his arms in front of his chest defensively, forcing Minato to chuckle at the childish behavior. Then it's a deal. We will depart the day after tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 8. Be ready. Naruto nodded with a small smile on his face, and the two blondes burrowed themselves into the 2 steaming bowls of ramen. Naruto glanced at the small clock ticking irritatingly next to his bed and noted the late hour. It had been a long struggle to fall asleep, and in the end he left the bed after an aggravated groan. His eyes moved toward the window and toward Konoha. A weary sigh left his soft lips and 5 minutes later he left the apartment in the hope that a small walk in the fresh air would help him out. He let his feet take the lead, moving unconsciously with a blank mind on the almost empty streets of the village. Half an hour later, he found himself slowly walking on a narrow path inside the woods, his feet leading him to his well-known hiding place, to the top of the Hokage monument. A familiar fragrance stroked his nose and his blank mind sharpened when the sweet scent of vanilla became recognizable after a second. His mother's scent. He sniffed once more at the cold, fresh night air and let out an unnoticeable thin layer of chakra to map his surroundings. He found 3 presences around him. One was that of his guard, and 2 other familiar ones not far away in a clearing. Curiosity rose inside his chest, and he felt the urge to finally shake off his guard without causing any suspicion. He slowly moved toward a giant tree, utilizing the natural curve of the path to disappear from the sight of his ANBU guard for a moment. The blonde Chunin then channeled some of his chakra into the ground, creating a shadow clone under the roots of the tree, and replaced himself with it by way of a fast, unnoticeable kawarimi while the tree shrouded his movements. His clone had continued on his way toward the Hokage monument, but after a short way it stopped, yawed, and changed direction back toward his apartment followed by the fooled ANBU. Naruto waited for long minutes until he was sure nobody was around and rose from the roots, casually swept some dirt from his clothes and headed toward his destination deeper into the woods. After some hesitant steps, he stopped and pulled out a tiny paper tag from his pocket with a small seal written on the center of it. If he was going to spy on his parents, there was no way he'd let himself be found out. A thin layer of unsensible chakra spread across his body, a bit of insurance to mask his presence in addition to his hiding skills. After 10 minutes, he reached the margin of the small clearing, positioned himself on a tree, and checked his hiding place one more time before he forced his aching nerves to calm down. He felt guilty eavesdropping on his parents, but he couldn't suppress the urge to know as much about his family as possible. A warm smile appeared on his face when he glanced out from his hiding space and observed the scene in front of him. The two fearsome shinobi, the red-hot habanero and the yellow flash of Konoha, were lying on their backs in the middle of the clearing, watching the ink-black sky and the faintly glowing stars above them together, whispering to each other, chuckling and stealing small kisses. Naruto couldn't get enough of the scene. Sure, he saw them together countless times, but not in this discreet situation. His mother's gentle giggle echoed all around the clearing, warming him up from head to toe, but a small amount of shame never left his chest. He felt exactly like Jiraiya peeking at someone else, even when it's not nude woman. The blonde slowly closed his eyes and leaned onto the hard surface of the tree, listening only to their voices. Are you sure you can't simply send an envoy? Minato slowly turned to the slide to rest his head in his palm, watching Kushina with warm apologetic eyes. Sorry. It has to be me. We are going to hurry. I promise. The redhead let out a disappointed sigh. I hate when you are out of town. I also deserve to get some air outside the office, which still smells like tobacco, don't you think? I know, but I'm worried. Hey! I'm not some pansy. I can take care of myself. Kushina stayed in silence for a long moment before she finally answered. I thought the same about Toraku. Naruto's chest squeezed, guilt and curiosity fought in silence, but still an enormous battle in his mind. In the end, curiosity became victorious, so he just stayed. Kushina. I know. I'm just worried about you too. Both of you can be so reckless sometimes. You also know that if he wasn't exhausted back then, there is no way they could even lay a finger on him. But he was. And what if? There will always be an if. They stayed in silence for a long minute before Kushina finally broke it. It's good to see you two get along so well. I'm really glad you took my advice back then. A soft smile appeared on Minato's face. Yes, I'm also glad. It's hard to be an outsider. Start a new life while you are surrounded with total strangers. I know how he felt back then. At least I think I know. Our situations were very similar. Yes, but you two managed to adapt to the new situation. Well, mostly, when you two don't forget about yourselves. A furious, not so ladylike snort, a muffled thump, and finally a painful yelp reached Naruto's ears, and he had to suppress a chuckle that was ready to burst out. That hurts, Kushina. You deserved it, Databane. They stayed in silence for a long minute, but in the end they both started to chuckle and shared a soft kiss. Doesn't Toraku remind you of someone, Minato? I don't know. Give me a hint. His determination, his stubbornness when he fights and never gives up, even when he is just about to drop from fatigue while training. His power to forgive. Just like in Jiraiya's book, don't you think? Naruto flinched and forced his muscles to stay still. Minato stared into the nothingness above Kushina's head for a very long moment before he slowly closed his eyes when he answered. You don't know how right you are. Kushina raised a curious eyebrow, but Minato shook his head, a soft smile on his face. You know, Kushina, if I have a child, I hope he or she will grow up to be just like the protagonist, Naruto. Or just like Toraku. But that name has already been taken. What about Naruto? Kushina let out a small chuckle. A shinobi just like them. Naruto, it's a beautiful name. A small smile appeared on Minato's face, while the eavesdropper's chest squeezed tighter than he thought was possible. And what if the first will be a girl? That just won't happen. He will definitely be a boy. You wouldn't know it in advance, you silly. Then just let's find out. What do you think? What are you talking about? I'm talking about family. Let's have a family, Kushina. Let's have a child. Kushina stayed in silence for a long minute, before her soft, but sad voice filled the clearance. Minato, I want to. But you know what could happen. What if? Just trust in me. I can take care of that little problem. Will you believe in me, Kushina? For a long moment, nothing could be heard, only the leaves' soft ruffle as the warm breeze played with them. I believe in you, Minato. A soft, warm smile appeared on Naruto's face, and he simply left the clearing and his parents alone in the silver light of the full moon as if he'd never been there. The blonde shinobi took a last look inside his small apartment, spread out a thin layer of chakra to map his surroundings and find his ANBU guard at a safe distance. He nodded to himself when he felt Minato disappear from his own apartment, and his guard in the corner of the next house, and immediately turned on his heels and marched inside his bathroom. At the moment he closed the door, a clone popped into existence. Stay hidden and do not threaten our incognito. If something happens, get rid of the barriers and immediately disperse yourself before they see you. The clone made a short salute with 2 fingers and positioned himself on the floor in the corner of the small bathroom in a meditation stance. Naruto nodded, pulled out 2 scrolls from his backpack and rolled them open on the floor. He had prepared them in advance the days after he arrived back in Konoha from Kusa just in case, and now he was grateful for his foresight. 1 barrier seal, to mask the clone's presence and senjutsu chakra, not that anyone besides Jiraiya could sense it, but safety first. Another to hide him from the eyes, especially from the freaky eyes, in case a Hyuga or one of the Uchiha got the urge to wander around his apartment, and in his bathroom. A useful seal, he had developed it in the last months right after Madara. Naruto shook his head to clear his thoughts of the memories. The soft, thin hair on his neck started to tingle when the first amount of natural energy flowed toward his clone. The skin around his replica's eyes already started to pick up the familiar orange shade. He channeled a massive amount of chakra into the first one, and a golden barrier appeared around the clone, immediately masking the still flowing natural energy and his presence from his senses. Naruto nodded in his satisfaction and placed his hands on the next seal, repeating the hand signs, and the clone disappeared from his eyes together with the glowing barrier. He eyed the now empty corner, waving a hand toward the barrier which replied to the contact with a small wobble on the surface. The blonde time traveler grimaced at the reaction. He really hoped nobody would come into his apartment while he was gone and try to walk inside the bathroom, especially not into that empty corner. If that happened, a shiver ran through his spine at the thought. I don't think this is a good idea for Naruto. We have to risk it and find that bastard as soon as possible before he can influence Obito and put his plan into motion. This plan is still just too risky. Minato will come for you in 10 minutes, he will find your seals and nothing will save your ass dash, our asses if that happens. No, he won't. Maybe he is better in everything else, but barriers are my specialty. Kurama let out a doubtful snort and rolled his giant eyeballs. Do not underestimate the Yondaime Gaki. I would never do that. I just hope he trusts me. I didn't give any reason for that. Nor did Toriku. You are gambling. Naruto shrugged. I'll take every risk that is necessary to protect my precious people. He turned around once more, closed the bathroom door, and placed a tiny seal on the inside on the door handle, no bigger than the nail on his pinky. A tiny, but useful security seal which would disappear and notify him if someone touched it. He hopped down on the couch and sank 2 small container scrolls inside his pouch, prepared and stuffed every necessary thing for the trip, including 2 dozen packs of instant ramen. Naruto waited impatiently until he felt the familiar chakra signature of his father approaching his front door, exactly a minute before 8 o'clock. He didn't give the opportunity for him to knock as he had opened the door and noted the raised hand of the Hokage, ready to knock, and the amused expression on his face. A satisfied and proud smirk appeared on his fine features at the scene. Fascinating as always. Naruto grinned from ear to ear, stepping out to close his door, then seal away the small key into one of his container scrolls and stuffed it back into place when he finished the process. So? Can we go? A smile appeared on Minato's face, and he placed his hands on the younger's shoulders, then disappeared with a golden flash, only to reappear in a blink at the village gates next to 2 stunned Chunin. You are an exhibitionist. Naruto pointed toward the big red kanji on the long white coat which slowly moved together with the rhythm of his father's silent and graceful footsteps. Minato looked back over his shoulder to find out what the hell he was talking about, and rolled his eyes when he realized. I'm not an exhibitionist. Think what you want, it still looks badass. Naruto's eyes twitched at the statement, and brought back the memories of his own claret coat with the same black flame patterns on the edges and his orange clothes. He ran his fingers over the standard shinobi clothes he'd been wearing for months. He missed his old appearance, but a sudden change in his style would just raise suspicion on him, and nothing more. Damn it. You are too. Are there any other Kage dancing around with a meter-long title on their back? Minato only shrugged and didn't respond, and Naruto let out a defeated sigh. Actually, he also thought it really looks badass, but for him, the best way to channel some frustration is to poke at someone. And his father, at this moment, was the only target around. They made their way toward the border of wind at a leisure speed. Their travel reminded him of the wandering he'd done with Jiraiya during the 2.5 years while they trained and traveled all around Fire Country, and sometimes outside the borders. They finally reached a town on the road, and Minato immediately aimed for the hotel next to a small hot spring. Hopefully not with the intent to peek. Naruto sank down in the hot water, which relaxed his muscles more than he thought possible. The knots and the light weariness immediately melted away from his muscles when the water reached his spine. His blue eyes traveled to the other side of the small steaming pond, where his father enjoyed the same sensation, leaning onto the shore with his back, his eyes closed and his face mirrored complete relaxation and something that he couldn't identify. The memories of the last night appeared in his mind, when his parents actually named him. Pride filled his chest when he thought back to the moment Kushina associated him with the protagonist. He watched his father, his golden hair framing his features in the same spiky way, defying gravity even when it was heavy with water. The only difference with his own hair would be its length, and the longer bangs framing his face on the side. Is there something on my face, or what? Naruto's eyes twitched at being caught staring. No. You just look relaxed and maybe satisfied. A small smile appeared on Minato's face. I'm satisfied in more ways than you could imagine. Minato's smile grew into a cheeky grin, and he suddenly ducked under the hot water and let out a pleased moan when he reached the surface again. He finally opened his eyes and stretched out his arms behind his head. I think this was enough for me. I'm going to look like a wrinkled old man. Naruto snorted. You are an old man, and he had to quickly duck underwater to avoid the incoming palm aimed toward the back of his head. He stayed down for a long moment, and when his head finally burst through the calm surface of the pond to finally get some air, Minato was already gone. The young man let out a sigh and followed his father inside the hotel. An hour later, they sat behind a counter, a third bowl of steaming ramen in front of Naruto, while Minato slowly sipped sake from a small white cup after he finished his own meal. The young village leader enjoyed the piece with closed eyes and the same relaxed and satisfied expression, his cheeks a tone redder than it is normal because of the amount of alcohol he already tucked away in his stomach. You know about the 3 Shinobi rules, don't you? One of them is to stay away from alcohol. Minato shrugged and took another sip before retorting to his brother. Blame Jiraiya. You could be happy I'm not a pervert. A snort left Naruto, while Minato's eyes suddenly snapped open by a sudden idea and an odd grin spread across his face. So, Toriku, you've been in Konoha for almost 4 months. The Chunin raised an eyebrow, not sure where his father was going with this. If we are talking about the Shinobi rules, I'm just wondering that besides missions, driving your A and B you guard up the wall, peeking in hot springs and the obviously insane amount of training you are doing, is there someone else who raised your interest? A girl? Naruto blinked. Then again. Then in the end he started to chuckle, then snicker, earning a lot of attention to their backs from the other guests. His laughter suddenly stopped. An annoyed grimace appeared on his face as he folded his arms across his chest defensively when something caught his attention. Hey! I'm not peeping in hot springs. And what's suddenly interesting in my love life? Minato refilled his empty cup and immediately emptied it without a word after a quick, casual shrug and a smirk. Nothing special. I'm just curious. How old are you? 18? Boys at your age should look for a companion from the other gender. Naruto stayed in silence, suddenly lost in his thoughts. The annoyance was already gone. Her azure blue orbs darkened to royal blue by sadness. Love, the image of his first crush popped inside his mind. The image of the pink-haired Kunoichi, who slowly became more like a sister figure to him. And finally Hyuga Hinata as she was standing above him, closing the distance between him and pain with her own body. Her confession, his rage when he thought pain killed her. The warmth of her hand in his own while they were fighting Madara and finally her eyes as she looked at him for the last time with a soft smile on her face. He shook his head to ease away his upcoming sorrow and clear his thoughts. 18 years, well, 1 year doesn't count, does it? Where was I on my 17th birthday? He searched through the memories of Toriku. They felt foreign, but still personal, distant yet still close. They were just odd, like the memories of his Kage Bunshins. He was able to read them and feel them, but at the back of his head, he knew he wasn't there. They weren't actually his own. Oh, I know now. I was with them. He let out an amused snort in his mind. The 10th of October. The day when Minato had introduced him to the team, and Kushina had chosen a birthday for him. The same date as his real one. What a coincidence or fate. Bullshit. I'm the one who will form my own life. I don't want to disturb your fascinating thoughts, but I think someone is waiting for your answer. Naruto blinked back to reality at Kurama's sarcasm and stared into the patient blue eyes in front of him, and he gave an absolutely true answer. I don't think about girls. At least not now. Maybe a year or so later. The Hokage raised an eyebrow, but didn't make a comment. They stayed in silence for another long moment. When we get back, I'm going to propose to Kushina. Naruto blinked. Then again in his surprise at the sudden confession, then his mouth moved to a warm smile. I would love to see a cute boy with blue eyes next October. You would be perfect parents. A soft smile appeared on Minato's face. You think so? Definitely. They stayed in silence for long minutes while Naruto finished his ramen, and his father emptied the small bottle of sake and stretched his arms behind his head. I've got another bit of important business to finish when we get back to Konoha. The blonde Chunin raised an eyebrow and curiously leaned a little bit closer to his companion. I will speak with Sarutobi and, despite what he wants, I'm going to cancel the surveillance on you. I made my decision a while ago. You earned our trust. Naruto stared into his father's determined blue eyes for a long minute, looking for any tricks or second thoughts, but he found nothing. He couldn't force down the urge and he did the first thing that popped into his mind. He stood up and gave the deepest bow he could manage to the Hokage, who looked back at him with wide and shocked eyes. I would happily give my life for the village's sake. And for yours. I swear on my life that I will do nothing that could harm the people of Konoha Databeo. Don't do that. Idiot. Just get up. A wide beaming smile appeared on the Chunin's face and he moved back to the counter followed by a dozen curious eyes around him. He could find the irritation in his father's azure blue orbs, but in the background he could also spot the awe, pride, satisfaction and the trust. Guilt filled his chest, then it was replaced by the overwhelming urge to confess everything, followed by the displeased murmuring of Kurama. Don't do anything stupid, Naruto. A half-smile appeared inside his head. I know. Also, we are going to move into the Hokage mansion. Sarutobi finally emptied it. If it's okay for you, I would like to offer a room for you. But only if you want it. The guilt increased, followed by shame, but he forced his face to stay warm and a smile to appear on his features. Can I think about it? A small smile appeared on Minato's face and nodded. Naruto had to restrain a wince. His father professionally hid his disappointment, but he could still feel it in his eyes. He really wanted it. But if he moved in, he would have much less space to act freely. Of course. It's not an order or anything. And I fear your tic will increase if you two spend more time together. Naruto made a confused face. You've been using your database more and more since you became closer to Kushina. And since you came back from Kusa. Minato added silently in his thoughts. The blonde Chunin sent back a cheeky smile and shrugged. He was proud of his tic. Especially since he knew that his mother would do the same thing when she got excited. They stayed in silence for a long moment. A big yawn left Minato's mouth, and Naruto followed the example unconsciously. I think it's time for us to finally get to bed, don't you think, Ototo? Naruto gave an agreeing nod and the two blondes slowly headed toward the stairs, toward their room and their well-deserved dreams. Naruto watched the horizon with the never-ending dunes. The soft curves of the granular ocean with giant and small waves of the golden sand. He could actually feel the azure blue eyes of his father on his back. He glanced up to the sun, not bothering himself with the stinging sensation when the hot beams reached his iris. At least it forced his memories away from his mind, memories which kept painfully tugging at the back of his mind ever since they reached the land of rivers. The place where Akatsuki extracted Shikaku from Gaara. Where he died. Where he came back to life. Where is he then? Naruto shook his head violently and finally turned around and the two blonde shinobi stepped onto the thin, almost invisible path which led to the natural walls surrounding Sunagakure no Sato. They reached the walls in 3 hours, stepping inside the narrow passage, the entrance to the village. Their movements were immediately followed by suspicious glances of the Suna shinobi around them even after Minato handed over the official invitation from the 4th Kazekage. Naruto fixed his eyes on the road, not daring to look around, fearing to spot something which could push him over the edge. Too many of his loved ones died here. They walked silently toward the center of the village, escorted by several jounin from Suna. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the dirt of the road, while Minato's eyes traveled on the seedy buildings, the weary streets, and the closed shops, the adjective signs of the village's low economy which made his heart sink into pity. A small amount of guilt appeared inside his chest. He was also responsible, at least remotely, for this. Konoha needed the funds from the missions, so the prices had been decreased to gain more commissions from the customers. Even the Wind Daimyo asked for their help and services on countless occasions instead of the weakened Suna. He slowly shook his head to ease away the guilt which was slowly increasing inside him. He must look after the welfare of his own village. Konoha must be first, everything else must be only a second thought. A small group of running children pushed him out of his thoughts, playing tag, laughing, unaware of the world around them. His azure blue eyes glanced toward his brother. The blonde teen finally turned his head and his eyes locked for a moment before Naruto averted his gaze to linger on a weary shop, then on a mendicant in the entrance of a small alley. Then he returned his saddened eyes to the dirt of the road after one last glance toward Minato. The young leader had to restrain a wince. The memory of his brother's determination to save everyone regardless of where he or she came from forced itself inside the young Hokage's mind, and shame ran across Minato as the guilt raised again in his chest. Only one glance into his brother's sad eyes was enough for that. Minato gratefully noticed that they had reached their final destination, the tower marked with the enormous kanji of wind above the entrance, and he stepped inside with a relieved sigh. They reached the door which led inside the Kazekage's office. Their escorts finally left them alone in the empty passageway in front of the wooden door. The Kage took his time inside the office just like last time, before he finally sent a guard to escort them inside. Minato gave a small nod greeting the leader politely, who returned the gesture just as lightly as Minato. No Kage would bow to another and submit to the other. Naruto stepped inside the office trailing after Minato, fixing his eyes somewhere out the wide windows of the office. He greeted the Kage with a bow, and with every last bit of his self-control he finally forced his eyes to look into the eyes of the village leader. When their orbs finally met, Naruto forced his body not to flinch when he noted the familiar features of his late friend. The same short and spiky auburn hair, the same face structure. He shook off the sorrow that was ready to burst out and forced his ripping chakra to calm down, which did not go unnoticed by the two leaders. However, fortunately, both had interpreted his reactions wrong. The eyes of the Kazekage locked with Naruto's, then flickered to Minato and back to rest them on the blonde chunin. They were filled with suspicion, fixing him with a calculating gaze for a long minute until his stern face moved into a knowing half-smile and finally turned his attention to the now irritated and impatient Minato. Hokage-sama. I take you and your relatives weary after the long trip. I'm grateful for your worry, Kazekage-sama, but this was just a small tour for us. You came with a very small delegation. If you had informed me, I would have gratefully sent an elite squad to escort you here. The shinobi of Konoha are strong. I came with the best bodyguard. Torikoku is one of our strongest. Naruto watched in awe as the two powerful shinobi continued their veiled, yet obvious bickering. A small battle and power demonstration between two Kage. He listened to how they jabbed each other discreetly, how they attack with words and deflect with sentences. How each tensed after a harsh comment of the other, and how they relaxed their muscles after a well-spoken retort. This was really a battle of words. Naruto waited patiently in the background until the bloodless fight finally died down and ended in a tie as they eyed each other for a long silent minute until the Kazekage spoke, getting tired of the situation. Hokage-sama. Please excuse me, but my schedule is strict. My shinobi will escort you to your accommodation. We can continue our talk tomorrow. Kazekage-sama. Minato gave a nod, and the Kazekage returned it, after a short hand sign. A familiar Suna shinobi appeared beside them, the same who kept an eye on him almost continuously during their last visit. And also the same who fought next to Naruto and Gaara in the front line during the battle for Suna. However, he couldn't remember his name. Naruto watched the sleeping village from the balcony of their room. He had been leaning on the sill, his arms crossed while he rested his chin on them. He slowly closed his eyes and his mind gave up the fight to suppress his memories. Two figures were standing on an identical wide balcony, one in a torn yet still brilliant orange jumpsuit, and the other dressed in red, a giant gourd held to his back by leather strips. They stood there, silently, just enjoying each other's company without a word, watching the peacefully sleeping city under their feet. I'm leaving tomorrow. I have to find him before he strikes again. The Godane Kazakage turned toward his companion and answered with a stoic but commanding voice. You are staying here. A dubious and annoyed snort left Naruto's nose. And what will you do? Kazi Kaguya-sama? You also know that you can't stop me anymore. I'm stronger than you. The stoic and stern expression melted away from Gaara's face as anger flushed through it. Have you ever used your brain? What do you think will happen to you if you march to him? You think this low of their sacrifice? Our sacrifice? My sacrifice? All of them died because of one cause. To protect you, and you would just throw out everything because of your selfishness? Naruto watched his usually stoic friend throw out his calm and almost emotionless shell, shouting out his tension. Are you finished? The words left Naruto's mouth in a low murmur. No, I'm not even close to finishing. Tsunade would. You are finished, Adebayo. Naruto barked out, his voice was commanding, cutting off Gaara's sentence. You still don't understand. You still don't understand a thing, do you? Gaara's voice was low and filled with disbelief, while he shook his head. And what will you do? Tell me what you will do. Gaara barked out again, the once low tone in his voice nowhere to be found. You are our last hope to stop him. You are powerful, surpassing everyone, but you also don't have a chance alone. You almost died last time, and if he hadn't done what he did back then, you wouldn't be standing here. You will just march to your own death and serve our free will to him on a silver plate if Madara gets you. The balcony suddenly illuminated by brilliant golden glow as pure chakra flames appeared on Naruto's body. Once azure blue eyes glowed with a furious crimson red. No. It is you, who doesn't understand a thing. I won't hide while everybody else is fighting. While everybody dies around me. I should be the one fighting out there, protecting you and everyone else, not versa Adebayo. The two shinobi stared at each other without a word, without moving for a long tense minute. You will stay here. I will force you if I have to. With this last statement, the Godane Kazakage turned around and left the balcony without a word or looking back. Naruto stared at his friend's back as he walked away, the golden chakra slowly fading away from his form, together with his anger. Naruto felt a familiar presence behind him, slowly approaching him, kicking him out from his thoughts. He didn't look back, he just stayed still until he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. What's with the long face, Ototo? Just thinking. About what? Naruto let out a long and weary sigh. How on earth could he tell him something like this? Instead, he straightened himself and stretched out his numb arms, desperately trying to find something in his mind to answer his father. Things. Minato raised an eyebrow. You are pathetic, Naruto. Kurama snorted and Naruto grumbled back an answer in his mind. Not that you gave me any better idea. What kind of things? Naruto shrugged casually, still carefully avoiding his father's eyes. You know things. Life, death. Stuff like that. They stayed in silence for a long moment, not knowing what to say to each other in the unusually serious atmosphere. If you could change things. If you got an opportunity to go back in time and change things in your life, what would you do? You are on thin ice, Naruto. Naruto made a mental shrug. Come on. It's just some fun. Furthermore, there is no sane human who would seriously link it with me. You are in a really serious mood. Minato folded his arms and closed his eyes, gathering his thoughts. Well, theoretically, if I could go back in time, I would do nothing differently. Naruto frowned. You could save your family. Every move, every single act affects our lives. Not just ours, but everyone's, whether near or far away from us. Even the bad things. Nothing would be the same if I didn't lose my family. Maybe a lot of people would die because of my actions. Maybe Konoha would lose the war and I wouldn't become Hokage, and maybe I'd never have a relationship with Kushina or meet you. There are so many consequences of just one simple act that it makes my head hurt. And what if you could, for example, prevent the Third Shinobi War? If you had the knowledge to stop it before it happens and save thousands of lives? Minato stayed in silence for a long minute, lost in his thoughts, before he answered. I don't think anyone could bear such a burden and stay sane. I'm sure I will start hearing voices in my head pretty soon. A nervous chuckle left Naruto's mouth, earning a raised eyebrow from the Hokage. The chuckle grew into laughter by the irony. Even the almighty nine-tailed fox snickered inside his mind. What did I say that is so funny? The Chunin waved a hand, turned around while still chuckling continuously, and left the confused Minato alone. He leaned onto the doorframe and looked back over his shoulder after he finally gathered himself. Thanks. You really fixed my mood. Minato shook his head, then shrugged and followed the once again chuckling Chunin inside the apartment. They arrived at the tower a little bit early, so they had enough time to observe the going and coming villagers and shinobi. Minato leaned against the wall of the tower, and folded his arms in front of his chest, his blue eyes fixed on the people of Suna. He received suspicious gazes, and some of the younger shinobi literally fled the vicinity as soon as they realized who they'd just passed. Naruto stood next to their ever-present escort, the man with red markings on the right side of his face, while the left was covered by the sheet of his turban-like headdress with Suna's symbol. Naruto watched him from the corner of his eye curiously, his arms folded behind his neck casually. The shinobi stood calm, with closed eyes, but from time to time glanced toward Naruto with irritation. Well, curiosity killed the cat, but I can't stand it anymore. But before he could act, the opportunity was out of his hands. Don't stare at me like that. I'm just thinking. You will be our personal escort for the rest of our stay? Just like before? The shinobi nodded, but the irritation never left his eyes. Can you tell us your name? It wouldn't be nice if I just called you Shinobi-san. My name is Baki. You can use that. Naruto grinned in his satisfaction and stepped to his father, who fixed his azure eyes on a group of fresh genin. The Hokage stretched his limbs and turned to their escort. I think it's almost time. We should go inside, Baki-san. The shinobi made a small bow and they approached the gates. 10 minutes later, the office door of the Kazekage finally opened, and they stepped inside, where Minato immediately greeted the Kage with a slight nod, while Naruto gave a formal bow and soon moved to the background, silently listening to their conversation about the details of the alliance between Suna and Konoha. The fourth Kazekage was really a hard nut to crack. He was a bullheaded person, who would do anything for the welfare of his village. The biggest point during their conversation was the assignments from the Wind Daimyo, and they had avoided a real loud argument only by an inch. Naruto watched the conversation in awe, forcing his brain to understand as much from the small indications as he could, for future use. However, his determination slowly started to wear off when the negotiations calmed down, not to mention boring political subjects had taken over. He soon lost track of the time, his breathing slowed down, and his mind drifted into a dreamless sleep. Minato's eyes wandered to the twitching dark eyes of the Kazekage and noted that his gaze was pinned behind him, the exact same spot where his younger brother intended to stay still in the background, the same person who swore to everything that morning that he wouldn't cause any trouble during the negotiations if he could attend. The Hokage let out a weary sigh and closed his eyes for a moment, before he turned around to spot the lightly snoring blonde Chunin in the chair, slightly leaning his head against the wall. He turned back to the Kazekage, made a small excusing nod and stood up with the intent to channel some of his frustration onto his newly found relative. Before he could reach him, the door softly opened and a small, blonde girl stepped inside the office, without a word, staring at Minato with wide eyes. Then in the next second, for his biggest surprise, the child stepped in front of him, and tugged his white cloak. Hi! Did you bring me chocolate again? The confused Minato glanced at the Kazekage, whose stern look started to crack, as he let out a long sigh and shook his head. Minato turned back to the child, who narrowed her eyes as she examined his face, then stepped backward hesitantly. You aren't Kitsune-san. Minato's eye twitched. How on earth? Finally the Kazekage raised his voice, and the small child immediately stiffened when she realized she did something wrong. Temari. Go back home. And where is Yashimaru? A sleepy yawn could be heard from the corner, where the blonde Chunin finally started to wake up from his nap by the raised voice. After a few blinks, Naruto noted the scene with his sheepish mind. Temari, still gripping Minato's cloak, the irritation in the Kazekage's eyes, the confused and surprised look on his father's face. A panting young man maybe in his 20s joined them in the office, with wide fearful eyes. Kazekage-sama. I'm sorry, I just turned around for a minute, and then I told her she couldn't come in. Minato started to chuckle at the irrational scene and he crouched down to the small child in front of him. He could feel the eyes of the Kage, and the hidden bodyguards at his back. I'm sorry. I haven't got any chocolate. Maybe you should ask my brother over there. I'm sure he is the one you are looking for. Look after him for me, will you? The expression on Minato's face was soft and warm toward the girl, while Naruto stepped toward the child, followed by the stern eyes of the Kazekage. He glanced toward the Suna leader, remembering their last conversation to stay away from her, and after receiving a small agreeing nod, he also crouched down next to Minato. Temari-chan, it's time for both of us to leave, I think. The small girl nodded hesitantly, grabbed his hand, and after a bow toward the leaders they approached the door together with the troubled man. Toraku the blonde teen stopped at the door and turned back to his father. We will meet back in the accommodation. The Hokage's smile was soft and warm, however the blue eyes glanced toward the blonde teen with a dangerous spark. A spark which demanded a thorough explanation once they were together again about him revealing his identity to a child. Naruto gulped and nodded in understanding, and the only expression he could push on his face was a miserable smile. When the door finally closed, the Kazekage let out a weary sigh, while Minato occupied his previous place in the chair. The two leaders shared a knowing glance for a second before they continued like nothing had interrupted their previous talk. However, the mood was visibly lighter between the two young leaders. Naruto was literally dragged through the village by the small child, until they finally reached their destination and the blonde boy could finally straighten from the crouched position he was forced in by Temari. They were standing in front of a large house, not far from the city center, together with the obviously nervous young man, with sandy brown hair and big blue eyes. Temari-chan. I have to get back to my place. Father told me to go home. The small child tugged his hand one more time, pulling him toward the wooden entrance. Temari-chan, I can't go in. Your father is going to kill me. So will Minato if he doesn't find me in our accommodation when they finish. A shudder ran through Naruto's spine when he thought back the demanding eyes of the Hokage. He hesitantly turned toward the other man with pleading eyes, asking for help, when the door slowly opened and a very similar person glanced down at the scene, at her small child dragging a blond young man toward their door, followed by her troubled brother. Temari! What are you doing? I visited my father. And why are you dragging that boy? Because the other he told me he got my chocolate and to look after him, and father told me to go home. The woman raised a confused eyebrow, and Naruto finally freed himself from the small hands and bowed to the woman. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I have to go. Kitsune-san. The other you told me that you got chocolate. I trained. It's really hard. And I can smell the chocolate on you. The woman narrowed her eyes at her child's behavior. I'm sorry, Shinobi-san. I apologize for her behavior. It's Toraku. Odoroki Toraku. Naruto gave a low bow and a small smile toward the woman. The seal will be placed soon. Maybe it was already placed. He couldn't restrain himself anymore. His blue orbs moved toward her big round tummy, with Gaara, while the woman's eyes moved toward the Hittite on his forehead with the proud insignia of Konoha. You were the one with the fox mask 2 months ago. The blonde teen nodded, and his azure eyes looked with a curious look at the young woman. Temari-chan talked a lot about you. My name is Kurura, Toraku-kun. It's a pleasure to meet you. Temari's mother gave a polite nod. Why don't you come in? I'm sure Temari would be happy. Naruto made a surprised face and looked down into the pleading and sparkling eyes of Temari. The blonde teen made a small bow and an apologetic look. I'm sorry. But I don't think your husband would appreciate that. Nor would my Hokage. The woman sent him back a warm smile. Let me handle that. Naruto glanced around, looking for help, but in the end he just hesitantly nodded and they stepped inside the house, together with the nervous sandy brown-haired man. I don't think it's a good idea, sister. The woman let out a sigh. It's fine, Yashimaru. Furthermore, it is a good opportunity to strengthen the alliance if the families of the two Kage know each other a little bit more. Don't you think, Toraku-kun? Naruto frowned. He hadn't said anything about his relationship with Minato. How did you know? The woman smiled, as they finally settled down in the living room, on 2 big couches. It's quite obvious. Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Well, yes. We do look quite alike. Temari moved closer to Naruto, and after a long hesitant moment, she poked him on the arm. Kitsune-san, where is your mask? A soft smile appeared on Naruto's face at the childish curiosity on Temari's face. On the face, which in the past mostly looked back at him with the same stern expression as her father's. I had to give it back when we arrived home. Why? Because I don't need it anymore. Why? Naruto looked toward Kurama for help, but before he could answer, Temari suddenly changed the topic. You look better. So it worked? You don't have those bad dreams anymore? A warm smile appeared on Naruto's face, and he ruffled the blonde locks of the small child, to her annoyance. Yes, it worked. Thanks to you. Then can I get my chocolate? A soft chuckle forced itself out, and Naruto dug both hands into his pockets. When he pulled his hands out, they were clenched into fists, concealing their content from the curious girl's eyes. You can have it, if you pick the right hand. So which one? Temari made a wondering look, leaned her head to the side, and sniffed into the air lightly. After a long minute, she slowly poked toward his left hand. Naruto opened it with a chuckle and handed over the small sweet to the girl, who reached out without hesitation. I'll go and find Kankuro. You have to meet him too. Temari rushed out from the room immediately, leaving a stunned Naruto and her softly smiling mother. You know, Torikaku-kun, you've made a big impact on her. She frequently mentions you. I didn't do anything. A soft smile appeared on her face in response. Maybe. Being the Kage's child or relative is a hard task. Especially for a child. Her father and the village put high expectations on her. Naruto nodded in his understanding. At the thought of how his life would have been different if his father and mother had been alive. He wouldn't have been the dead last back then. He let out a weary sigh. I don't know. But I could imagine. I haven't been aware of my relationship with Minato until recently. Not a total lie. He didn't know about his heritage until the battle with Pain. Kurama didn't push the subject, seeing his uneasy attitude around it, but he noted the suspicious glances from Yashimaru. Minato is a good man and the best brother I could ask for. And he is a good leader. I know the alliance will be fruitful for both of our nations. The woman nodded with a soft smile, but she suddenly flinched and the two men turned to her with a worried look, but she only waved a hand and chuckled. It's okay. It's just a baby kicking. Oh. Once more. Naruto curiously leaned closer, spreading out his senses, and he finally spotted another fast heartbeat. A soft, warm smile spread across his face, but soon the warm sensation was replaced with worry for his not-yet-born friend. It's okay, really. Kurama seemed to misread his expression. She confidently stood up and sat down next to the blonde teen and grabbed his hand. Here. She gently placed his shaking hand onto her round tummy, followed by the worried and suspicious glance from her brother. They stayed in complete silence, and Naruto felt himself more and more awkward, not sure what was going to happen, his hand on the Kazekage's wife's round stomach. Oh boy. I hope they are still talking. It would be a pain in the ass to explain what I am doing here like this. At that moment, he felt a small poke on his palm. Then another one. A wide smile spread across his face, and he slowly closed his eyes, enjoying the feeling of the small life under his palm. He could sense the vibration as Gaara's small body moved, he could hear the fast heartbeats. Suddenly an uneasy feeling struggled itself into his brain. I could feel you. I know you are out there. I'm going to kill you, Kyubi. So it's already done. Naruto let out a weary mental sigh. Not that you could, Shikaku. You bastard. Sooner or later I'll get rid of my pathetic vessel and then coo. I'll show you how strong I am. Naruto closed out the loud argument inside his mind, at least he tried with less success. He could still hear the two Bijou hissing curses at each other at the back of his head. He didn't know that the seal was this weak. That it allowed Shikaku's thoughts to break through this easily. And the consequences will be fatal for Gaara's mental progress. Naruto could finally understand Gaara's early behavior, amazed by his strength to live together with Shikaku, with his bloodlust, and with his insane thoughts. Would you two stop Databeo? Don't intermeddle. The two-tailed beasts barked out together, agreeing for a short moment, before they continued insulting each other like nothing had interrupted them. Naruto let out a mental sigh and immediately started to look for the invisible seal, and when he found it, and examined the design. Naruto flinched almost unnoticeably and unconsciously started to frown. That is worse than I first thought. Toriko-kun, are you alright? Naruto was finally slapped back to reality and looked around himself, noted the confused eyes around him, and he immediately released the tummy of Kurura. I'm sorry. I kind of spaced out a little. A half-smile appeared on the woman's face, and she nodded, but his brother looked at him with cold, suspicious eyes. I'm afraid I really have to leave. It was a pleasure to meet you. He stood up almost immediately and bowed. I understand. It was our pleasure, Toriko-kun. Yashimaru, could you please escort him to the door? The young man nodded, stood up, and the two men walked to the exit. Naruto stepped out, but before he left the stairs, he felt a hard hand on his shoulder, and he immediately tensed, before turning around. If you, or your Hokage, ever try to harm my sister or her children, I will kill you. Remember that. The blond boy raised an eyebrow at the brazen threat toward him and Minato, but in the end he nodded. I understand. But you don't have to worry. I want only the best for them. Yashimaru narrowed his eyes, and never took his eyes off Naruto's back while he left without any further word. Naruto walked back to their accommodation silently, lost in his thoughts, wondering about Gaara, the seal, and how the hell he could help his future friend. Minato stepped inside the large living room, ready to chew his younger brother out. When he spotted him on the large couch, he made a satisfied mental smirk and stepped closer to demand an explanation on how on earth could the Kazekage's 4-year-old daughter know his face. He stepped in front of the teen, whose head flung freely between his shoulders, staring at the floor. His blue eyes, which almost continuously shone with vim and sauciness, were now puzzled and worried. The blond boy in front of him was obviously locked inside his own head, inside his thoughts, not aware of his presence. The urge to scold him immediately melted away as he sat down next to him, and slowly shook his shoulder. The teen flinched and looked around with wide and surprised eyes, when he finally spotted his curious and concerned blue eyes. I don't think you are worried because I was about to scold you. What's the matter with Toriko? Naruto looked back for a long minute, lost in the identical azure-blue ponds. I can't do this alone. Naruto! Don't blow your cover and concentrate on finding Madara. Don't risk this now. You can take care of it later, when we get rid of that damn Uchiha. I can't. Then do it alone. And how on earth are you thinking I can do this alone? How? What do you think I should do? Sneak inside while they are sleeping and try to fix the seal alone? I can't do it without Minato. I need him. I need his knowledge. I can't fix that damn seal alone. You are walking on thin ice again. How will you explain away your knowledge about Shikaku? I need him. I just need him. Naruto heard the defeated sigh of Kurama, and the angry mumble about him and idiotism, but he ignored it all. He needed to concentrate on the problem at hand. Leaving his mind, the blond boy took out a small paper tag from the pouch secured to his leg, placed it on the table, and activated the privacy seal in total silence, before turning to the Hokage to meet narrowed eyes. I gathered some sensitive information today. Suna got the one-tailed beast. Minato let out a sigh and rubbed his bridge. We already know about that. Don't bother yourself about it. How do you even find out about it? He licked his dry lips, gathering his thoughts before he finally replied to his father. I met with his. A cold shiver ran through his spine as his own words reached his ears. Jinchuriki, he hated that word. Its meaning, human sacrifice, even how it sounds. Minato looked back at him for a long, silent minute. His face was expressionless, but Naruto was sure the thoughts raced inside his head with insane speed. Are you sure about this? Naruto nodded. I'm absolutely sure, Dadabayo. Minato let out a weary sigh and leaned back on his couch. We know about it, but we didn't know they already sealed it away into a human. Minato slowly shook his head. This could be a serious problem in the future. Naruto nodded, waiting patiently for him to continue, examining his reactions. But when it didn't happen, he opened his mouth. It will be a long time until the child can use Shikaku's power. But the blond teen closed his eyes, gathering his every thought. Minato, the seal is weak. I felt it. It could break any time. We can do something about it. The Hokage narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, resting his chin on his folded fingers, for a long silent minute. You are suggesting for me to convince the Kazekage to let me fix the seal, and hand over to him a future asset and a possible threat toward Konoha. Naruto felt his eyes twitch, and anger rose inside his chest, but he finally forced his nerves to calm down. I am talking about a child's life. An innocent child's future. It's going to break, or drive the child into insanity in the end. Minato stiffened on the couch by the tone, and what had just been spoken, while Naruto let out a sigh. I understand your anxiety for Konoha. Think in a different way. Sand will owe Konoha, and you would also show your intentions to build a strong alliance. You could save the Kazekage's child from dying, or going insane. Minato raised an eyebrow. The Kage's child? The blonde girl? Toriku slowly shook his head. No. Temari is an absolutely normal child. A little arrogant, but still cute child. I met Kazekage's wife today. The child in her womb. That child is the of Shikaku. The Hokage's eyes widened with shock. An unborn child Okami. How did you notice it? I heard Shikaku when I touched Karura. Minato raised a doubtful eyebrow. That's impossible. You can't hear a bijou, just by a mere touch. Even you can't do that with your sensing skills. I know what I heard, Databeo. This is just speculation. There is no way you could have heard it by a mere touch. Brat, don't do what I think you are going to do. Just let me handle it, Kurama. Naruto let out a sigh. I know about her, I know about the Kyuubi inside Kushina. Minato froze, his muscles tensed, and he distantly felt his hands start to squeeze his knees and his joints became white by the force. Naruto watched the Hokage, his muscles relaxed, his voice and his core calm, to show Minato there is nothing to be afraid of. The blonde teen let out a weary sigh and rubbed his temple. Look, Minato. You know firsthand how hard the life of it is, no matter where he or she grows up. They are hated, feared and shunned when their identity is public. Kushina is fortunate because of you, because of the Sandaime who granted incognito status. What do you think, how will this child grow up, hearing the continuous mumbling of a tailed beast inside his head? How would they hide his identity if he lost control of Shikaku's bloodlust and went berserk in the center of the village? Minato's tensed muscles started to relax, as his frozen mind finally started working again, chewing and weighing every word of his brother. We talked about my goals, the waves in the ocean. Hereby I tried to convince you to help me bring peace, be the second drop of water and save the future of a child. The Hokage let out a weary sigh and buried his face inside his palms for long silent minutes. Nothing could be heard inside the still glowing barrier. Even if it were not present, the village around them would be in complete silence, as if the world around them also knew how important the decision about to be made is. Toriku the Kazekage would never agree with that. He will never reveal the officially and especially won't allow me or you to have even a glance at the seal. Let me talk to him. I can convince him. Naruto let out a weary sigh, while his father started to massage his forehead, to ease away his starting headache. I will attend. You won't do it alone and I will immediately step in if I think it necessary. Thank you? Naruto gave a small bow with his head, while Minato let out a weary sigh. You are really taking this save the world thing seriously, aren't you? A foxy grin appeared on the whiskered face. I will never go back on my word, Databeo. With this last statement, Naruto left the room without any further explanation. His movement was followed by the azure blue eyes of his father, filled with pride and awe and with the hope that maybe his child really will grow up in a better world. Chapter 15. Tanuki and Blue Globe. Everything seemed to stop for a second. Birds appeared to freeze in flight against the blue sky. A lonely azure butterfly stopped in midair. The sounds of nature died down, leaving nothing, only dead silence all over the shores of the never-ending desert. The frozen moment suddenly disappeared with an enormous explosion, burying every living thing under dust, soil and sand near the epicenter. Gaara! A flash of gold appeared next to the Godame Kazekage, painting his lean form in a golden glow. Dilated and crimson red eyes locked with green orbs, while the golden flames danced in the reflection of the leader's eyes. Where is he? We haven't spotted Madara yet, Naruto. He has to show himself soon. The gold aura slowly faded away, leaving the weary, heavily breathing form of Naruto. The blonde wiped the sweat from his forehead, while his eyes surveyed the desecration in front of him. We can't hold on for too long. It became stronger with the 8 tails. How are the 9 tails? Kurama needs more time. The panting slowly died down, and the blond boy nodded to something only he could hear, before biting his fingertip and running through a long chain of hand signs. Kuchio's no jutsu, summoning technique. With a loud puff and an enormous amount of smoke filled with chakra, 3 giant figures popped into existence. The 3 giant toads each had a pair of clones on its head, one already in meditation to gain energy from nature, and one observing the battle not far away from them. Guys, we need to buy time for Kurama. The 3 toads nodded and almost immediately jumped into the middle of the fight, toward the giant monster called the 10-tailed beast. Uzumaki Naruto jerked up from his bed, desperately trying to catch his breath for a long minute before his pounding heart finally settled down and his panting subsided. The blonde left his sweat-soaked bed and headed to the bathroom to clean his face and clear his thoughts. The first beams of sunlight reached the small bathroom window, reflecting off of the small mirror in front of him. The blonde eyed his own reflection with a foggy brain when his thoughts wandered back to the battle in the land of rivers near Suna's borders, almost exactly where Gaara had died for the first time. Naruto shook his head, easing away the last bits of his nightmare and his memories. 10 minutes later, he settled himself down on the rooftop of their accommodation, watching as the rising sun slowly warmed the freezing cold of the desert night, enjoying the first warm beams on his skin. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, behind the giant walls around the village. The walls that hadn't lasted long against the destruction and the unnatural power of the 10-tailed beast. In the end they, along with the buildings, streets, and countless numbers of shinobi and civilians, became one with the endless sand of the desert around Sanagekure no Sato in the heart of Wind Country. I will repay my debt, Gaara. Believe it! I will repay! The faint rumbling of Kurama didn't reach his consciousness. He just buried himself in his thoughts and for long hours stayed still, watching the horizon, the rising sun, and the slowly awakening village under his feet in complete silence. Awkward silence filled the office, the stoic and stern face of the Yondaime Kazekage disturbed only by a small twitch of his dark eyes. And why would I grant a private audience to a shinobi of Konoha? The Kazekage drawled. Minato stepped next to Naruto in support, and to show that he was there if he needed help, and a quick glance over his shoulder eased away his concern as he looked into the confident and determined eyes of his brother. Kazekage-sama, I request a private audience with you in order to talk about a very sensitive matter. Other than Hokage-sama, no one can be present. The leader's dark eyes twitched again and filled with irritation. He folded his arms in front of his chest, obviously trying to avoid the talk. You can talk freely in front of my guards. Unless this sensitive matter is for your own sake. The information concerns you, Kazekage-sama. The stern mask melted away in one blink, revealing the leader's surprise, anger, irritation, and curiosity, before it was back again in another blink. What could you know about the leader of Sand that can't be discussed in front of my shinobi? With all due respect, Kazekage-sama, don't misunderstand my objective. I want to protect the future of a child, not your reputation, with privacy. The leader eyed the 2 blondes in front of him, one a confident young man, the other the Hokage of Konoha, who was silently waiting in the background but still ready to interfere. His thoughts traveled with insane speed inside his head for a long, silent minute before he interrupted it. So be it. I will be generous. Naruto made a deep bow and took out a small paper tag, marked with a privacy seal, from his pouch. If you'll allow me, Kazekage-sama. He gestured to the seal. Not that I don't trust the privacy seals in this office, but I'd like to use my own ones just to be safe. The leader nodded, and Naruto immediately channeled some chakra into the small piece of paper, activating the seal. Their picture became foggy from the outside, while their voices were immediately locked inside the barrier. The blond boy glanced toward his leader, who motioned to continue with a small nod. We know about the one-tailed beast and its... The Kage's dark eyes flashed dangerously, and his muscles tensed. And how did you gather this kind of information? Naruto shook his head. Our methods are not relevant to Kazekage-sama. All that matters is the fact that Suna possesses the power of a bijou. So does every other nation, including Konoha. I won't hand over the one tail to you, no matter what you offer for it. Naruto narrowed his azure eyes. That is not why we are here. And remember, we are talking about a human being, a child, not some item on the market. The blonde let out a breath to ease away his rising anger, before he continued. The seal is weak. The leader of the sand frowned, eyeing the young man from head to toe, before his gaze moved toward the still silent Hokage. The seal is strong enough. My best seal master made it. Naruto ran his fingers through his blonde locks and let out a frustrated groan. Strong enough, my ass? No offense to Kazekage-sama, but the one who made the seal, in a word, sucks. Minato's eye visibly twitched at the saucy and impolite statement, and so did the other leaders, whose anger started to rise after the stab at his pride. How dare you criticize my people? You don't know what you are talking about. You can't even prove your point. Tell your seal master that the natural elements on the meridian are unbalanced. This is the main cause that allows Shikaku to influence the vessel's mind. He or she will understand, as long as we are talking about a real seal master. The seal is weak. It could break at any time, and it will allow Shikaku to affect the child, perhaps even push him into insanity. The One-Tail has a very wicked personality. His bloodlust will influence the child in the future without a doubt. I am offering you our help to fix the design free of charge. The leader of the sand narrowed his eyes and ran his dark irises one more time over the men in front of him, his thoughts racing. The Yondaime Hokage is a seal master. So am I. We can fix the design and save your child's life and sanity. A disbelieving snort slipped out of the collected man's mouth. If I agree to this, I am essentially handing over to you the Osuna, along with the seal's design and thereby the key to getting your hands on the one-tailed beast. Its value is too large to the village for such a risk. Naruto felt his eyes twitch while anger rose in his chest, making his muscles tense visibly as fury started to overwhelm him. He unconsciously squeezed his hands into fists, and in the back of his mind he could feel a small amount of pain as his nails dug into the soft flesh of his palms. You are speaking about your own child, Databeo. The future of your own child is in your hands, and you are talking about values? You are this village's leader, yes, but you are also the father of this child. We are here to build a strong alliance, to help you out, yet you would throw away this opportunity because you think your secret seal weighs more than the life and sanity of your own child. The seal isn't just weak, it threatens Karura's life too, because it leeches chakra from her own system. It could be deadly during the birth for both of them. The Kazekage froze, while his eyes narrowed dangerously. If you value your village, your people, then you must value your child, because he is one of them. You can't disregard a life this easily. The offer is open indefinitely, but we are running out of time. Think over carefully what you could do for the village and for your own conscience. Don't do something you would regret later. Naruto turned around and marched out of the office, followed by the stunned Hokage, and the privacy seal was dismissed as soon as he crossed over it. His chest rose and fell heavily. He could feel his pulse pound against his temples as anger started to cloud his mind, but he restrained the red fury boiling inside his veins from bursting out with his last ounce of control. How could he be so stubborn? Risking his wife, his own child, for a village secret that's not even a secret. Calm down or we are going to reveal ourselves. You are on the verge of leaking out my chakra. Naruto suddenly stopped in the middle of the spacious square and let out a long breath, forcing out his anger with minimal success. He felt a stabbing gaze on his back, and he wasn't surprised to spot the narrow eyes of the Kazekage in the window when he looked over his shoulder. He didn't avert his burning blue gaze, not even when he felt a calming palm on his shoulder, and finally the Kage stepped back, breaking their connection. You did well, Toriku. Though your diplomacy needs some work, a lot of it. But you successfully made your point, and I think he heard you. Naruto finally looked away from the empty window and let out a weary sigh. I think I ruined today's schedule. Not that I'm disappointed about it. The Hokage shrugged and grinned, and the blonde boy finally allowed his tensed muscles to relax as his anger and frustration slowly faded away. Come. I think it would be best if we go back to our accommodations. But first, let's pick up something to eat. Naruto answered with a wide grin as his stomach gave him away with a loud rumble. The two blonde shinobi left the square, a dozen suspicious and nervous glances from various corners and shadows following them. A short knock on the wooden door disturbed Naruto's nap after the not-so-light lunch. Without opening his eyes, he noted the person in front of the door. Baki. Another short knock echoed inside the room, and the blonde finally got up from the comfortable couch and moved toward the impatient shinobi. My apologies for the disturbance, but Kazekage-sama would like to see you immediately. Naruto nodded in understanding, closed the door, and shared a glance with Minato, who had finally stuck his head out from his own bedroom, where he had locked himself up an hour ago to do whatever he was doing. That was quite fast. The Chunin nodded and let out a nervous sigh. Let's go. 10 minutes later, the two blonde shinobi stood in front of a long wooden table, the younger obviously nervous and impatient, while the older had a stoic expression on his fine features. The only thing which helped the younger blonde's nerves was a familiar small figure standing in the background, eyeing them suspiciously. An old woman in her 60s, dressed in gray with pale purple hair, Chio, one of the honored siblings, who had not so long ago given her life for his friend in the past. Or the future, depending on how you think about it. The same woman who had locked Shikaku inside Gaara, and the same woman who had designed the seal poorly, pushing him into insanity during his childhood. Gaara's savior, and the cause of his burden at the same time. Naruto fixed his eyes on the back of the yondaime Kazekage, who was gazing out the window, watching the busy goings-on of the people of Suna, blissfully ignorant of a decision that could seal not only a child's fate, but theirs as well. The leader ran through a short chain of hand signs, and all chakra signatures outside the room disappeared. I will do anything for the sake of Tsunegakure no Sato. I am willing to sacrifice everything for this village, and my family knows this very well. Naruto tensed and clenched his hands into fists, as he started to feel the anger slowly bubbled inside his mind once again. The village needs the power of the one-tailed beast. The Kazekage finally turned around, and ran his dark eyes over the three people in the room. But I am also willing to do everything to protect my children. The stern expression melted away from his face for a short second, revealing a man who cared deeply about his family and his village, before his expression hardened again into the well-known stern mask. But it was enough for Naruto to finally relax and let a relieved sigh leave his mouth. I accept your offer. Chio will assist you during the process. The Kazekage made a small nod toward the teen and the Hokage and left the room without a word, leaving the three people alone. A heavy burden disappeared from Naruto's shoulders, his limbs becoming numb from the enormous relief and happiness. Occupied with his own joy, he was not aware of the stabbing gaze from the old woman in the corner. Minato cleared his throat to gain his attention before he started bouncing all over the room, snapping the boy back to reality. The Hokage slowly stepped in front of Chio and made a small, but polite, nod toward the old woman. Chio-san. We would like to start as soon as possible. The old woman nodded and gestured for the two shinobis to follow her to a room on the first floor. She still hadn't said a word, the only hint of emotion she showed were her narrowed eyes and piercing glare, as she rolled open an enormous scroll on a long wooden table. This is the design of Gaara's seal. Naruto whistled at the sight of the design, but only after a minute of silent observation did a troubled frown appear on his and Minato's face. Oba-chan. This is very creative, I have to admit. Chio's eyes visibly twitched at the cocky honorific. Minato observed the seal for a long moment before he also turned to the elderly woman. Is there a copy? The woman's eyes narrowed dangerously. There isn't. And you aren't allowed to bring this out of the room. Minato nodded, but Naruto couldn't suppress a snort. Oba-chan, we won't steal this sloppy design. It's not worth it. But we will need proper equipment. Brushes, ink, some paper to work on, so on. You know. That kind of stuff. The Hokage rolled his eyes and moved his gaze back to the scroll to continue his examination. After a long glare at the blonde teen, Chio made a small wave with her hand. A Sananbu immediately appeared beside her and left after she told him their demands. The small group stayed in silence for a long half-hour, while each of them examined every aspect of the complex seal. Naruto felt like his head was going to explode after 20 minutes with the enormous amount of information on the fine paper. The effects, the after-effects, and the reactiveness of each individual symbol, kanji, curl, and line, the delicate balance between the two sides of the meridian, the interactions between each element. He could compare its complexity only to his own now that he could see the fine details, aside from the mistakes which allowed Shikaku to speak his mind to Gaara more than necessary. Erosenin stated earlier that his designs were wonky and that it was shocking that he hadn't blown something up yet. He had confidence in his knowledge and experience, but seeing this seal crushed it to small pieces when he realized just how much was missing in regards to the fine details of. The only fields he had absolute confidence in were the barriers that he used to hide him and all of his companions' presence and give them protection during the war, and in his own seal, which he knew like the back of his hand. He glanced toward his father, and he noted with relief that his azure eyes traveled from symbol to symbol, sometimes nodding to himself, sometimes frowning or mumbling under his breath, while his paper slowly started to fill with notes. Minato Namikaze was a real seal master with great knowledge. Naruto himself wasn't a theoretical man, and though his knowledge about jutsu was still very advanced, it was mostly chaotic. Without a proper teacher, Naruto had learned mainly from old scrolls and simple trial and error. It had been hard and painful, literally. An exploding seal right in your face is a pain in the ass. Learning from his previous failures had been his method back then. He had only gotten help with the basics, thanks to Ma and Pa and occasionally Kakashi-sensei. His mind slowly drifted away from the room, toward one of his memories where everything had started. Naruto leaned over an enormous scroll, examining the complex black pattern on the approximately 100-year-old document. A frown appeared on his face as his eyes drifted from the symbols toward the specification. A seal that would be able to capture hundreds of people in one go, sealing away their souls forever, regardless of their power. Half of the pattern had been lost during the years, the ink faded away, and a large chunk of paper was missing from the left corner, taking a piece of the design with it. The blond man dropped his head to the table, eyeing the design millimeters from his face. If I could do it, if I defeated Sai left his soft lips, while the ancient paper rustled from the harsh wind on the rough table, filling his nose with its odd smell. He heard a soft voice behind his back, but he didn't need to turn around to know who it was. What are you doing here, Sai? That is my line. It's almost midnight. You should rest, Naruto. The blonde waved a dismissive hand, while the black-haired shinobi approached him and glanced down at the table. Talking still felt strange. He still subconsciously worried over how he worded his sentences, and his voice still lacked tone. Sometimes it still felt dead. What are you doing? Nothing. Just thinking. Naruto shrugged and straightened himself. What am I thinking? I haven't even got the dexterity for it. I don't even know how to hold a brush properly and dash dot. Naruto stayed silent for a long minute before his eyes widened and he hopped from his seat and grabbed the other teen's shoulders. Sai, you have to teach me calligraphy. The always stoic and emotionless ex-root Anbu raised a curious eyebrow. I'm happy that you are interested in the arts, but I don't think this is the proper time for that. Don't be ridiculous. I don't want to paint flowers and birdies or anything like that. I need it for. The black-haired teen swept Naruto's hands from his shoulders. You are not capable of learning that. Fuin Jutsu requires patience, precision, and a level head. You lack all of them. You are clumsy, impatient, and hot-headed. The exact opposite of the requirements. Not to mention your subpar intelligence. His words once again lacked most of his emotions. This isn't about can or can't. I have to learn it, Databeo. Sai slowly shook his head. You don't have a proper teacher. You don't have enough time. Just perfecting calligraphy requires years. Time isn't an object. How long does it take? I learned it for 3 years, for at least 2 hours a day. 3 years for 2 hours a day. I can do that amount of training in 2 days or less if I push myself. Naruto, that is impossible. There is no way you. Sai. I mastered 3 other elements in weeks, which needs decades of training for someone else. I can do it. I have to do it. The black-haired teen watched him for a long moment, fixing his emotionless eyes on the determined blue pools, and in the end he let out a defeated sigh. I'm definitely going to regret this. Naruto gave a foxy grin. Sai finally really sounded like he was annoyed. In a day, every corner of Mount Mayaboku was filled with blonde teens, frowning, hissing, bitching above scrolls, papers, or soft sand with a stick, their hands and clothes stained with black ink but their identical blue eyes filled with determination and stubbornness, while they copied the kanji countless times over and over again. Naruto blinked when he felt the soft hand of his father on his shoulder. When looked around, he realized that Chio wasn't there anymore. When did Oba-chan leave? Minato raised an eyebrow at the sensing genius. Just 5 minutes ago. Is everything all right, Toriku? You look disturbed. The blonde rubbed his eyes and leaned back against his seat. I'm all right. It's just I will never understand how anyone could do this without caring about the consequences, looking at humans and bijus as mere tools and weapons. Minato watched his brother for a long minute. You know a lot about the Bijou and… I do, Databeo. Be careful, Naruto only dismissively waved a mental hand at Kurama. Human sacrifice balance between the countries bullshit. All it comes down to is power. Power that could ruin the life of someone who didn't even ask for it. The Bijou aren't brainless monsters. They also want peace and freedom. But Shinobi use them and the as mere tools. It's wrong in so many ways. I hope one day they will understand each other. The Bijou, the and every Shinobi. Minato observed the young boy in front of him with his azure eyes. He never thought about those things in such a way. But for a Bijou and its to understand each other was equivalent to IWA and Konoha making nice dinners. I understand your point, and I feel the same way. Using a child to create a is unthinkable to me. I would never do that willingly. A sarcastic snort left Naruto's mouth. You would do it without a second thought. I wouldn't. Naruto felt his eye twitch in his irritation, but it was short-lived. He was already over that. Maybe you will face something that doesn't give you any other choice. If that time comes, you would do it without hesitation. You are the same as the Kazekage in more ways than you think. If it was for the sake of Konoha, you would throw away your life with a smile on your face. I will cross that bridge if I come to it. But for now, I would never do that. Naruto watched his father, with his burning blue eyes, his previous irritation, and small amount of anger, slowly disappear, and it was replaced with an unnatural amount of calmness. The blond boy averted his piercing gaze, a soft smile appearing on his fine features. If a time like that comes, you won't have to make that choice. You will get a family to look after. I won't let you die, Databeo. Minato stayed silent for a long, awkward minute, chewing on the words carefully, his eyes locked on the form of his brother. He knew very well what his brother just offered to him. His own life. To seal away a Bijou, a sacrifice was more than likely necessary. Especially for the stronger ones who required a complex seal. Kyuubi, for example. Complete silence fell on the topic before he said something else he would regret later, emptying his mind and his aching soul, and concentrated on their task, fix the seal and save Gaara's sanity. While he focused on the seal, he was oblivious to the piercing blue eyes locked on him, sparkling with awe, pride, and concern. The hours passed with small arguments and countless ideas on the half-dozen rough sketches and notes, until the day finally passed, taking with it Naruto's wakefulness. Exhaustion and lack of sleep slowly overwhelmed his weary mind. He passed out in his chair, his head rested on crossed arms on the desk. The room was silent. Only the muffled sounds of crackling paper and the soft ruffle of the brush broke it from time to time. Chio had come back an hour later, suspiciously watching the two blondes work. In the end, she had to admit the brat was right. The seal allowed too much space for Shikaku to influence the vessel. Her dark eyes drifted toward the sleeping blonde teen, listening to his small snore, the peaceful and almost childish expression on his face, the small twitching of his eyelids when his mind drifted into a dream. No shinobi would sleep this deep inside enemy territory. It didn't matter who their companion was, Hokage or not. Fortunately for the unconscious blonde, the faint mumbles that left his soft lips were indiscernible. Her eyes drifted to the also obviously weary Hokage, who worked on the last details of the new design that would be able to fuse with the old seal without much problem. Chio was disappointed in the Kazekage, maybe even angry, but mostly confused. She couldn't understand this whole situation. She couldn't understand neither the Kazekage's decision nor the Hokage's. Why? Her voice cracked from her age, and stabbed the silence like a knife. Minato had finished his last brush stroke and glanced up at her with a questioning raised eyebrow. Why are you doing this? Chio continued, fixing the seal gives you nothing. There is no rational reason for you to do this for our sake. The Hokage gave a warm smile and glanced toward the sleeping teen on the table. Gaining a strong ally is rational enough, don't you think, Chio-san? The old woman narrowed her eyes. Alliance means nothing. All it is an empty promise on a sheet of paper. In war, Konoha will act only for her own sake, just like she did before. It is true that alliances didn't mean too much during the last war, but the world changes, villages change, leaders change. Sometimes you must let the changes happen to see a new world. Chio's eyes twitched. Handing a weapon to your former enemy's hand isn't rational, and isn't enough cause for an alliance. How do you know you can trust us? Minato stayed silent for a long moment, and his eyes traveled toward the peacefully sleeping form of his brother again. Don't misjudge my actions, Chiyo-san. I don't trust you, nor does the Kazekage trust me. That is why you are here watching us in the first place, is it not? But I do trust my brother. I trust his dreams and his goals. That is why I am doing this. The old lady didn't respond, and her face showed only confusion. Minato let out a weary sigh before he parted his soft lips to continue his explanation. I wasn't planning on bringing this issue up. It's your own home affair, not Konoha's. But Toriku is solicitous about this child's future, and he convinced me to do so. That boy over there holds great power, and could one day bring great changes to the shinobi world. Minato didn't say anything more, simply turning back to his work to finish the final details, while Chiyo moved her eyes toward the sleeping young man, and she also stayed in silence for the rest of the day, burrowed inside her own mind, together with her thoughts. Kazekage-sama. The two from Konoha have finished the design. We are preparing to modify the seal in the early afternoon. The leader of Suna nodded, but didn't turn around from the large windows of his office. He simply stood there, arms folded behind his back, watching the empty streets of his sleeping village. Chiyo slowly stepped next to her leader, and without a word joined him in his occupation. For a long while no one said a word to break the silence until the old woman finally opened her wrinkled mouth. Suna can take care of her own problems. Why do you let Konoha interfere with our home affairs? The Kage stood in silence, his eyes focused on a mother and her small child on the streets, before he finally answered. It's peaceful, isn't it? Chiyo raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Yes, it is. I intend to keep it that way. At any cost. You can't trust them. The Kage stayed silent for another long minute, lost in his thoughts, before he finally opened his mouth to answer. I don't trust them. His eyelids closed around his dark eyes, weighed down by his own thoughts, lost in his mind. But that boy, he made me wonder about myself. Dark and old eyes twitched. That boy. Again that boy. Months ago, Jiraiya told me something about that boy, when the Hokage first sent him here to distract me during the negotiations. The Kage didn't open his eyes as his thoughts wandered back to 2 months ago. He is someone like you and I were once, before we lost ourselves in the shinobi world. He still carries and gives goodwill to anybody without considering who he gave it to. Now I know what he meant at that time. The Kage finally turned toward the small and old woman for the first time since she entered the office. Do the sealing as soon as possible, Chiyo-san. The old woman nodded, realizing that her Kage had closed their conversation and made his final decision. She left the room without any further comment, but her thoughts still did not settle. Naruto ran his eyes over the ink-black pattern running across the room like a spider web. There were only a few words that could describe the enormous and complex seal. It started from the center of the ceiling, ran across the walls, over the floor, and connected again on a dais positioned under the starting point. Together with Minato and Chiyo, they spent 3 hours painting the seal without a minute's rest. The faint scent of the Kazekage's blood, which was mixed with the ink, filled his sensitive nose, and he couldn't restrain himself from grimacing. He heard some faint footsteps from the passage, and the Kazekage appeared in the door, his not-so-calm wife hooked to his arm. Naruto sent an encouraging warm smile toward Kurura and stepped forward to help her navigate without stepping on any of the patterns. Everything will be alright, Kurura-san. I promise. The woman answered only with a weak smile. Please take off your overclothes. Naruto felt a small amount of killing intent slowly started to fill the room from the direction of the Kazekage, but the woman obeyed after a hesitant second, revealing her round tummy and soft skin. The blonde teen handed the clothes over to the Kazekage, carefully avoiding his eyes, then picked up the woman and gently placed her on the dais, careful not to ruin the pattern below her. Please don't move. Kurura nodded with her eyes, and Minato and Chiyo finally also appeared in the door. The blonde teen crouched down for the brush and the remaining ink, to finish the seal. Precise black strokes appeared on the woman's skin, on her arms, legs, writhing toward her round tummy where they concentrated into a small whirling pattern around her belly button. Naruto once again ran his eyes over the pattern, looking for any errors, any misplaced or shaky strokes, and made a satisfied nod when he found nothing. He locked his azure blue eyes with Kurura. Her face was calm, but Naruto could see the fear and concern behind her eyes. He sent another encouraging smile, but the fear didn't vanish. He glanced over his shoulder and noted that the stern look had disappeared from the Kazekage's face. His dark eyes mirrored the same worry as his wife's. Kazekage-sama, could you come here, please? The leader narrowed his eyes, but nodded in the end and carefully moved to the center where his wife was laying almost naked, avoiding the pattern. His always rigid eyes widened when the blond boy simply reached out for his hand, but his rising anger immediately flushed away when he gently placed it under his wife's palm. There. You are here as a husband and as a father. You can act like that. A soft smile appeared on Minato's face, and he also stepped into the middle of the room, facing his brother. Are you ready, Toriku? Naruto glanced at the Kazekage, who also gave an approving nod, and then he slowly leaned closer to the laying woman in front of them. Karura-san. This might be unpleasant, but please bear it and don't move. The woman hesitantly nodded with her eyes, then she immediately locked them with his husband's, who gave her a soft, caring smile in response. Naruto made one final nod and turned toward Minato. Identical blue pools locked after one last inspection of the design. They stayed in silence for a long moment, before they both started to run through an enormously long chain of hand signs, perfectly mimicking each other's movement, like they were just looking into a mirror. When they reached the last sign, they froze in motion and the pattern around them glowed with a yellow light for a second. Then the glow immediately faded away, leaving the original black ink color. The seal suddenly flinched and started to writhe into Karura's belly, inside her womb toward the small life under her pounding heart. The two blonde shinobi remained frozen, only their expressions shifting to intense concentration, while the seal slowly and submissively moved to overwrite the old one. Nothing could be heard in the room aside from the ruffling sound as the seal moved and the increasingly labored breathing of the two seal masters. Their bodies and minds started to become weary from the joint effort, while their chakra surged into the seal without break. After half an hour of sheer effort, the remains of the pattern suddenly stopped moving, and a wobble ran through it. A painful hiss left Karura's squeezed lips, and Naruto could distantly feel as the Kazekage's muscles tensed and their hands squeezed each other's until their joints became white. Naruto clenched his eyes and teeth shut, as did Minato, as they focused more and more chakra into the seal. Naruto's left eye suddenly twitched and his face started to mirror irritation along with the concentration. Shit, stupid Tanuki. Naruto pressed the words through his teeth unconsciously as his mind filled with Shikaku's yelling, hissing voice. Just stay still, you bitching idiot. He could feel his bloodlust, his struggle against the new seal, his last desperate attempt to break free, attacking the small seams and openings left between the new and old seals before the two completely merged together. Minato restrained himself from glancing toward his brother and breaking his concentration. I won't let you mess with his head, Databeo. The two blondes pressed more and more chakra into the seal, and the wobble slowly died down, the seal continuing to inch toward Karura's belly. A relieved breath left Karura's lips as the tension disappeared. The two Konoha shinobi mimicked the action, unaware of the Kazekage's sudden glances toward them. The seal finally twitched one last time before quickening its movement as the last kanji and symbol disappeared from the walls and Karura's skin, into her belly. Minato slowly stepped backwards to lean against the wall for support, and wiped the sweat from his forehead, while Naruto simply dropped to the ground, finally allowing his weary body to catch its breath and rest. A small chuckle left his mouth, and it slowly increased into a satisfied laugh as the adrenaline left his body and his muscles started to tremble from the strain. That was close. Minato nodded and stepped back up to the dais while the Kazekage gently helped his wife to sit up. Karura-san. You must be weary. Please rest, Minato instructed her gently. The woman only nodded with a weak smile on her face, before almost immediately closing her eyes and drifting into unconsciousness. The Kazekage stiffened and folded his arms around his wife to give her support, his eyes filled with concern and fear. Minato sent a small reassuring smile toward the leader. She is okay. Just sleeping. The sealing was successful. The Kage nodded, lifted his softly breathing wife into his arms, wrapped her clothes around her, and started to leave the room. He turned around at the doorstep and made a deep bow toward the two weary blondes. Thank you. With this he simply left, together with Chio, leaving Naruto and Minato alone in the now empty room. Minato offered a hand to his brother, who gratefully accepted the help and straightened himself. Minato eyed the teen for a long moment with curious eyes. You really heard Shikaku. The Chunin snorted and grimaced. Even I can't blaspheme as elaborately as that damn Tanuki. Minato let out a soft chuckle and grabbed his brother's shoulder. Come. I think we deserve a long nap. A wide grin appeared on Naruto's face, and suddenly every bit of weariness left his body as realization hit him hard on the head. I did it. We did it. His limbs became numb by the relief, and a great burden disappeared from his shoulders. He felt the urge to bounce around the room, to scream and shout and laugh maniacally, and only Minato's presence restrained him from doing so. The satisfied grin never left his face as they reached their accommodations, where the two shinobi simply collapsed on the bed for a well-deserved rest. Four forms stood in the enormous passage carved into the yellowish rock. The desert was still chilly after the ice-cold night, but the early beams of the rising sun, already starting to stroke the land, would soon warm up the dunes and golden sea to an almost unbearable level. However, the early beams brought only pleasant warmth to the four people. After the sealing, the negotiations moved in a different direction. The mood was lighter and agreements were drawn with increased speed. The discussions were successful and everything pointed toward a fruitful alliance between Konoha and Suna. Soon, traders would fill the route between the two villages to exchange goods as per the arrangement, hopefully creating more missions for both ninja villages. The two leaders also agreed that Konoha would only accept an assignment from the Wind Daimyo together with Suna, and vice versa. The dark eyes of the Kazekage locked with azure ones, before moving to another pair identical to the first. The four forms silently waited for each other, gathering their thoughts for a final goodbye before the duo left the land of wind. A sudden small smile appeared on the Kazekage's face, mirrored on his wife's fine features, whose hands rested on her round tummy. Hokage-sama. I wish you a safe trip. Minato mimicked the smile and gave a small bow in response, as Naruto did the same to Kurura. Thank you, Kazekage-sama. I think it's time for us to leave. The leader nodded and a wide grin appeared on the Chunin's face. Next time we meet, Kurura-san, I hope you will be carrying a healthy auburn-haired boy in your arms. The woman gave a warm smile. We don't know the gender yet. A small chuckle left Naruto's mouth. Oh, trust me. He will be a boy with the potential to surpass you, Kazekage-sama. The leader narrowed his eyes, but in the end a small, almost invisible half-smile appeared on his face, erasing his stern expression. That is the duty of the younger generation. Minato smiled and nodded in agreement. Suddenly, a small grunt left his mouth as his blonde companion slapped his back, forcing out a small amount of air from his lungs and earning himself an angry glance from his Hokage. I'm sure he will be a good friend to Minato's and could have a slumber party, or something when they're older. The named shinobi narrowed his eyes, and returned the slap to the back of Naruto's head. It's really time for us to leave. Minato gave a very small, polite bow, and even though Naruto was rubbing the back of his head with a whining sound, he still forced out a small pathetic bow as well. The two figures left the passage to enter the never-ending sea of sand. The Kazekage tilted his head to the side, watching the two blonde men in the distance, obviously poking at each other until the Chunin started to run to avoid a blow from the Hokage. The wind blew their voices away, but a loud laugh still reached him, forcing the Kage's face into a smile. The leader slowly shook his head and turned around to head back to the village center, together with his softly chuckling wife. The two blonde shinobi reached the borders of the Land of Fire in 2 days. The sight of never-ending green woods warmed Naruto up from head to toe. It didn't matter how much he liked the nights in the desert, seeing green after the long week in Suna was just priceless. The blonde teen stretched his arms behind his head while they walked on the narrow path, deep inside the woods. It's good to finally be home. The Hokage chuckled and nodded. Feeling homesick after just 1 week away? Naruto only shrugged in response, and they continued their silent walk down the path. Hey Minato. Is the offer still up for a room in the Hokage mansion? The Hokage sent him a warm smile. Of course. I take it your answer is a yes? Naruto nodded and a wide grin appeared on their faces. They walked beside each other, Naruto with his eyes closed, using his senses to walk on the pathway, and unaware of the wondering look on his companion's face as he watched him. I was wondering. Naruto opened an eye and glanced toward Minato from the corner of his curiosity. Could you help me with something? The Chunin raised an eyebrow, and finally turned his head to face Minato. It depends, but it's good to hear the almighty Hokage ask for a lowly Chunin's help. A cocky grin appeared on his face, forcing Minato to roll his eyes. Don't push it, I can assign you to nothing else but D-rank missions for the rest of the year. A furious snort left his mouth in response to the threat, but it was replaced with a shiver that ran through his spine at the thought of gardening, babysitting, and running after lost cats. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Naruto narrowed his eyes, eyeing the emotionless face of the Hokage for a long minute, weighing how serious his threat was. You are really messed up in the head. The Hokage chuckled in response, and stopped on the path. So, will you help? I don't even know if I'm able to, so just spit it out. A wide grin appeared on the Hokage's face. You are really good at elemental manipulation, and beside me you are the only one with wind affinity who I trust enough with this. Minato simply raised his hand and opened his palm, and almost immediately a spinning, azure blue chakra globe appeared between his fingers. The hair on the back of Naruto's neck instantly stood up as his senses filled with the powerful chakra, swirling with insane speed inside the perfect ball. He needed every bit of his self-control to restrain himself from saying anything stupid and make sure that the muscles on his face remained stoic. He already knew what his father wanted from him, and inside his mind he felt like he was 12 again, jumping up and down in his excitement, shouting and grinning like a maniac. Naruto forced himself to remain outwardly calm and tilted his head to the side, eyeing the so familiar and dear technique with curiosity. The blonde forced the muscles on his face to move and mirror confusion, while he looked back to his father with a questioning look. Nice. Minato raised an eyebrow, and couldn't keep the disappointment from his face. Nice? That is all you can say? This is my pride and joy, beside the Hiraishin, and all you can say is nice? His shoulders slumped in defeat, letting the blue orb disappear. Naruto finally gathered himself, and immediately started to backtrack. I didn't mean nice in a bad way, I mean nice as in super badass. I know how hard it is to create something like that. Minato raised an eyebrow at his brother, desperately trying to save the situation, and in the end, a chuckle forced itself out, and he simply waved a dismissive hand. Okay, I have to admit it's not as fancy as some of your techniques, but it's still powerful like hell. Naruto nodded, agreeing. Despite the fact that he learned and developed dozens of new and powerful jutsu, the foundation of his strongest ones was still the Rasengan. No jutsu other than the Rasengan's variants were strong enough to break through Madara's defenses. What was that technique? Naruto asked with a curious tone. That was Rasengan. It's still incomplete. Any time I try to add a wind element, it just breaks down. Naruto nodded and tapped his chin to show he was thinking about the solution that he actually already knew. So will you help me to solve this little problem? Naruto stayed in silence for a long minute, while his thoughts raced inside his head. What if I just show him? What if I let him finish the technique? He won't be able to throw it like I can without Sage Mode. Will he be able to use it without damaging himself? Maybe with the Hiraishin it could be used in a safe way. He slowly shook his head to clear it from the hundreds of disturbing questions. I have time to decide. A wide grin appeared inside his mind when he realized that he would get the opportunity to use Rasengan in the future without revealing himself, not to mention the remaining in his arsenal which were developed directly from it. I don't know yet. Maybe I could help. A wide smile appeared on Minato's face. Deal. When we arrive home, I'll teach you the Rasengan. Why not while we are traveling? Minato chuckled in response. The only one who knows it, besides me, is Jiraiya-sensei, and it took him more than 2 months to learn it. I know you are a genius in some ways, but it's a complex technique. A foxy grin appeared on Naruto's face, already calculating the possibilities. I got confidence in myself. I will learn it before we reach the gates of Konoha. Toriko, that's less than 2 days. There is no way you are. Wanna bet? The Hokage raised an eyebrow as a cunning expression appeared on his face, but he only got another foxy grin in response, which forced him to frown. In the end, he just waved away his doubts, his mind already looking for the prize he was going to win without even moving a finger. A wide grin appeared on his face also, and raised a hand toward the Chunin. Cunning little brat. You are as sly as a fox. I have a good teacher. A pleased snort echoed inside his mind, together with the chuckling of Kurama. Deal. If you aren't able to learn it before we reach the gates, you will do any repairs, the painting, and move every single piece of furniture into the new house. Alone. The grin only grew wider on Naruto's face, almost reaching both of his ears. A thought popped up inside his head, how his small prank would be just perfect for his father. Deal. And if I learn it, you will be the one who'll do that, without any help or jutsu. It wouldn't be fair if you just use Hiraishin to move everything, while I have to drag everything through the whole village with my clones. Oh, and creating a D-rank mission for it isn't acceptable. You will do it with your bare hands and with your pretty face. Minato nodded, his confidence never leaving him, while Naruto was cackling inside his head like a maniac, together with Kurama, already imagining how Minato would run with the boxes and furniture through the streets of Konoha, covered in paint from head to toe. So, when do we start? The Chunin chirped inside Minato's ear with a sing-song voice, while Minato tapped his chin as he gathered his thoughts. We will reach a small village in an hour. I need to pick up some tools for your training. Naruto nodded, and the two blondes headed toward their destination, to get some balloons and rubber balls for sure. Minato Namikaze felt himself steadily lose his confidence as he watched his younger brother pop the second balloon filled with water with a cocky grin on his face only after an hour of practice. He restrained himself from letting his mouth fall open, and the gulp rose inside his throat at the thought that he might have to carry everything through the middle of the village alone. He slowly shook his head to ease away the image of his total pillory. A small hope rose inside his chest. The next stages will be much harder. There is absolutely no way he will succeed with them. Hey brat. Slow down. Do you know how hard it is to do something badly when you know how to do it right? It's hard for me to mess up on purpose. A snort echoed inside his mind. That's just unbelievable. You normally have a natural talent for messing things up. Hey! When was the last time I messed up anything? His only answer was total silence. Okay, don't answer that. But it's still hard. Then try harder. Use your stubborn brain. Naruto rolled his eyes mentally, while Minato handed another ball to him, this time made of hard rubber, and explained the next step, just as Jiraiya had while they were looking for Tsunade to ask her to become the Godame Hokage after Sarutobi's death. Naruto let out a sigh when his thoughts wandered toward the snake. He could be anywhere, doing his experiments undisturbed, and who knows how many people had already died by his hands since he came back to the past. I should find him and just kick his ass. Great plan, discounting only one tiny little problem. Naruto mentally narrowed his eyes, looking for what the fox referred to. Do not interfere until it is absolutely necessary. That was our deal. Concentrate rather on the ball in your hand because it's about to pop. Naruto let out a weary sigh unconsciously. I can't just let him have his way in the shadows a second time around. Hey! What if I give some hints to Minato? Or to the old man? And how will you explain your knowledge? Naruto made a mental shrug. I don't know. You're the brains. Think of something. I'm glad you finally admit it. Naruto unconsciously rolled his eyes in irritation. Fortunately, Minato had fixed his eyes and senses on the small rubber ball in his hand, unaware of the small motion and his silent conversation. What if I just sneak inside the office and leave a message? And if they caught you? I've been able to sneak around the NBU since I was 6. They won't catch me. Do you think they will do anything with an anonymous letter that states that one of their greatest shinobi and heroes kills people in the shadows? Naruto frowned mentally. You got a point. If I only knew at least one of the places where he does his things, I can lead them there. I could say that I sensed what was happening or something. Naruto, if you interfere too much you won't know what will happen. We've already spoken about this time after time. I can't just sit and wait. And yet you still don't understand the precarious position you are in. I understand exactly what position I am in. A sudden bang interrupted their argument, and the blonde Chunin blinked down to his hands, with wide eyes. Shit. Yes. Shit is a good word, idiot. Shit. Naruto turned his head toward the voice, and found a gaping Minato looking back at him with wide eyes, disbelief written all over his face. Naruto made a mental shrug and sent a foxy grin toward the Hokage, who resembled a fish on the ground gasping for air. Minato was struggling between feelings of enormous pride, from the fact his brother was a damn genius, and concern that there was a chance that he might lose this bet. So, I would like my room to be orange. Minato flung his eyes from the empty hand of his brother toward the blue eyes, and raised a disbelieving eyebrow. Orange? Yes. Orange. There is something wrong with you in the head. And you will be the one who will paint your room orange, not me. The Hokage slowly shook his head as he forced his voice to sound more confident than he felt. The image of himself covered in orange paint was already starting to form inside his mind, forcing a grimace on his face. The Hokage of Konoha no Sato stepped through the village gates with a perished expression on his face, his head hung on his chest in defeat and his eyes wide, continuously muttering his disbelief. On the other hand, his young blonde companion marched inside the gates, casually grinning from ear to ear. The duo passed the two curious Chunin guards. One of them started to open his mouth, but he immediately closed it when the Hokage sent him a sharp glare that promised pain and suffering in the form of at least 1 month of long D-ranked missions if he dared to ask anything. In the middle of the village, Minato finally braced himself, and turned toward his companion with a straight face. We will meet tomorrow. I have to speak with Sarutobi before I go home. Naruto nodded, still grinning widely. Inside his mind a small amount of excitement had already formed. He was also curious about what he would find at home. Or more accurately, what his clone had found while they were out of town. He could feel that the seal on the door was still untouched and the clone had not dispersed, meaning he had remained undetected and undisturbed. The blonde Chunin headed toward his apartment, and stepped inside his flat after 10 minutes of silent walking, the whole way carefully restraining himself from breaking out into a run through Konoha in his excitement. His heart pounded faster and faster from the exhilaration as he dropped his bag onto the floor and grabbed the door handle to the bathroom, practically ready to tear the door open. He immediately felt the sudden spike of chakra inside his head as the security seal disappeared and the small amount of his own chakra left inside the seal returned to him. Naruto let out a long, calming breath before he stepped inside the bathroom. His eyes immediately fixed themselves on the corner. A satisfied grin appeared on his face when only the empty corner looked back at him. He had been away for longer than he had first thought he would be, so he had been hoping the chakra that he'd pumped inside the seal was enough to last until he did get back. His experienced hands ran through a short chain of hand signs, and the barriers disappeared from the corner, revealing a very weary-looking blonde teen, already out of sage mode to avoid detection since the barriers were down. The clone let out an enormous yawn and slowly straightened himself, obviously trying to tease the real Naruto whose curiosity had risen to an unbearable level. So? The clone made a half-smile, and slowly shook his head. Sorry, boss. It's almost as if they just disappeared from the face of the earth. I found every damn shinobi in the fire country, and the majority of shinobi in the other elemental countries, except Madara and Obito. The blonde Chunin let out a disappointed sigh and ran a hand through his golden locks. The clone clasped his shoulder reassuringly, then disappeared, leaving behind nothing more than a small cloud filled with the last remains of his already fading chakra. Naruto walked toward his bedroom, reaching his bed with its soft white pillows just in time as the exhaustion of his replica finally hit him with full force. In the next second the blonde Chunin collapsed onto the bed with a moan. The memories of his clone forcefully continued to pop up picture by picture. A frown appeared below his closed eyelids as memories pinpointing the chakra signatures of the once, or future, depending on how you think of it, Akatsuki members appeared. But it was replaced with a soft smile when he found the still-living Yahiko, a probably disturbed Zabuza, an enthusiastic killer bee, and even the almost invisible chakra of a toddler Haku. Naruto, finally overwhelmed by exhaustion, drifted into a dreamless sleep. Thanks for watching, Shinobi Squad. If you enjoyed this what if, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your theories in the comments, I'm always reading. Want more Naruto heat? Check out the other videos on the channel. Stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember even shadow clones need love. Peace out,